Stowaway. Katemery 999. Summary. Growing up Haddock Story 4, Hiccup and Astrid's marriage has hit the rocks. With their constant fighting and talks of breaking up, it's no wonder their children are suffering. But things escalate when their son sets out on his own and discovers that the world outside Berk is far more hostile than he could ever imagine. While an angry Hiccup and concerned Fishlegs set out to rescue him, Astrid learns that perhaps her relationship with her and Hiccup's daughter is a lot more shaky than she thought. Can this dysfunctional family repair their relationships before it's too late? Only HTTYD and Riders/Defenders of Berk are canon. Notes. Co-written by Emmert K. A lot of people say that this story is their favorite and I hope you love it too. Chapter 1, Anger Management. Chapter Text. This is Berk. At first glance, you might think it's a peaceful community. We don't start wars for fun, we don't kill dragons, and we don't even do that much hunting. On the surface, it looks like a cheerful, safe, and interesting place to live. But it's easy to miss what's below the surface. The thoughts and feelings we hide from the world. The anger we feel toward the ones we love and the anger at ourselves for feeling it. The hidden motivations behind the most mean-spirited acts. That's what you don't see. Yet it runs rampant no matter how happy everything seems on the outside. Unfortunately, if enough goes on below the surface, it's inevitably going to come into view. And sometimes when it goes unchecked, it's too late to fix. Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3 was exhausted. Sleep was something that was becoming increasingly difficult to achieve. And it always seemed to come at the worst moments. Up. Get up. The piercing voice above his head could only belong to his wife. Astrid Horferson Haddock wasn't even trying to mask the sounds she was making. It could not be morning already. Hadn't he just fallen asleep? Was she just out to torture him? He groaned and rolled over, putting his pillow over his head. What are you, Astrid stomped forward and ripped the covers off his back. I said get up. No. Hiccup moaned, curling up so that his body would remain warm. Too early. It is not too early. You're going to be late to your own meeting if you do not get up this instant. Gods, you're as bad as the kids. Astrid snapped. I'm not getting up if you're just going to nag me all morning. Hiccup retorted, stubbornly clinging to his pillow. Will you just relax? No, I will not relax. You're a grown man. Act like it. Astrid smacked him with the blanket she had just confiscated. Maybe if you start acting like a lady. You did not just say that. Yeah, I think I did. Astrid snarled and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Hiccup wished he could take it as a sign that he had won the argument, but he knew from experience that it was only just beginning. And now he was too busy stewing in his anger to go back to sleep. Hiccup had been chief of the hooligan tribe for just over 2 years. And in those 2 years, he had managed to delegate a lot of tasks among his people so that he wouldn't have too much on his plate each day. Unfortunately for him, breaking up fights was one of the duties he was saddled with thanks to his extensive experience in running the academy. It also happened to be his most frequent duty. It seemed like he had prevented his people from killing each other 8 or 9 times a day. And that was a conservative estimate that certainly didn't include the amount of fighting going on under his roof. Now that he thought about it, the irony of what he was about to do that morning hit him. Fed up with the amount of fights he now had to break up, he had decided to start teaching anger management classes to his fellow hooligans. It was about time someone taught them how to deal with their own disagreements instead of constantly going to get him. Maybe he'd have time to deal with his own family's issues instead of dealing with everyone in the tribes. He waited a few seconds before rolling out of bed and slowly getting dressed. No flight suit today. He had a feeling that the class would last a long time. Perhaps it would be a good idea to wear some armor just in case. As he pulled on a second pair of pants, this one made of more sturdy material that would hopefully protect his stump, he heard loud banging from the hallway. Wake up. Astrid bellowed, sounding even more irritated than before. Breakfast is in 10 minutes and if you are not out of bed and dressed by that time, you can just go hungry. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Time for the daily struggle to begin. He knew exactly what was going to happen. First, his daughter would technically follow the rules, though somehow manage to tick her mother off anyway, and he would have to wait until Astrid had cooled off a bit to stop her from letting the girl starve. Meanwhile, one of his children would manage to irritate the other and the first of many screaming matches would commence. This, he reasoned, was exactly why he was teaching his peers how to control their anger. He was far too busy preventing his children from killing each other. Taking a deep breath to calm himself before facing the inevitable shouting, screaming, and fighting, he walked out of the master bedroom and gently knocked on his daughter's door. "Addie, honey, just do as your mother says and maybe she won't yell at us," he said through the wood. "She always yells at us," the girl replied sleepily. Hiccup sighed. "I know. But at least try this morning, okay?" The door opened to reveal Adriana Miracle Haddock, her hair disheveled and her clothes wrinkled and put on at an odd angle. Her bright green eyes were half hidden by her drooping eyelids and she still had flecks of dried drool on her cheek. Hiccup thought he had a beautiful little girl, but it took a while for everyone else to see that. "Addie, come on. You can't go downstairs looking like that." The young father got to work smoothing out his daughter's shirt and tugging at half of her skirt so that it would be even instead of completely lopsided. He licked his thumb and wiped off the drool from her cheek. "For once, let's actually look like we didn't roll out of bed 5 minutes ago." "But I did roll out of bed 5 minutes ago," Adriana retorted, looking distinctly grumpy. "Yes, but let's pretend you didn't," Hiccup replied without missing a beat. "Where is your hairbrush? I think I saw a hairbrush back there." Adriana pointed to a corner of her incredibly messy room. Hiccup strode forward. "You're going to have to be more specific," he said, digging through the pile of clothes in the corner. "Are these clean?" "I don't remember." Adriana shrugged. "There it is." She pointed to the hairbrush embedded in a wad of socks. Hiccup picked it up and immediately got to work on his daughter's tangled locks. He had no idea how her hair always managed to look so terrible each morning when she looked just fine before bed. Once he had finally managed to remove the worst of the knots, Astrid had decided that they'd waited long enough. "Breakfast is ready and if you don't come downstairs this instant, you're not getting any," she yelled up the stairs. "Better go." Hiccup nudged his daughter forward. The girl scowled but led her father down the stairs and into the main room. Astrid had only set 2 plates at the table. This wasn't altogether surprising since Adriana was almost always late and Hiccup would run out of the house without breakfast most days, partially because he had a lot of work to do but mostly to avoid her glaring at him from across the table. Well. Astrid took one look at Adriana and was suddenly struck with the inability to criticize anything. She looked up at Hiccup and felt the same. "There's a nice change of pace. Thank you for the confidence boost." Hiccup deadpanned, picking up 2 plates from the open cupboard. Astrid glared at him but didn't say a word as she sat down in front of the bread and porridge. Without the usual morning fussing about Adriana's appearance, she found herself at a loss for words. In fact, the meal was uncomfortably quiet until a very excited voice shattered the silence. "I could do 6 chin-ups this morning." Fearless Finn Haddock burst out like he had been waiting for the best opportunity to share this information. "Yesterday I could only do 5 but I'm doing better now. I have muscles, see," he flexed his arm. "That's great, buddy," Hiccup said, only glancing upward at his son. "How many can you do, Dad?" Finn asked, his spoon suspended over his porridge and his blue eyes fixed on his father's forehead. "I don't know. I guess I'll have to give it a try sometime." Hiccup gave the boy a half smile. "Well, I was practicing yesterday and I could do a whole bunch of them." Astrid shot her husband a look before turning to her son. "When you can do 10, we can go on a flight. What do you think?" Finn's eyes widened. 10. 10. You've got to prove your strength as a Viking warrior." Astrid nudged the boy's shoulder. "That goes for you too, Anna." Adriana sighed. "I don't think I can." "You haven't tried. Come on, we can practice after the meeting." Astrid coaxed. "I bet you can do at least 2. "I don't want to." Adriana mumbled, her eyes fixed on her own porridge. "It's good exercise, Anna. Just for half an hour." Astrid wheedled, her eyes fixed on the top of her daughter's head which was shaking back and forth in response. "Half an hour and then we'll be done. It'll be over before you know it." "She doesn't want to, Astrid," Hiccup said in a low voice. "Well, sometimes kids have to do stuff they don't want to do. It's good for her." Astrid's eyes flitted to her husband, who didn't look up. "Yeah, when it's important. They're just chin-ups. She gets plenty of exercise running around outside." Hiccup finally met her gaze and narrowed his eyes slightly. Astrid pursed her lips, unwilling to argue with her husband in front of her children. The house became extremely quiet again. Hiccup sighed and stared into his food much like the rest of his family. Tensions in the Haddock house had been building for several weeks. Astrid had become steadily more snippy with him and he wasn't altogether certain why. He had tried to ask her what was wrong but she would shake her head and put off the conversation. He had a feeling that it would lead to a fight and he wasn't eager to start one. Of course, his marital problems weren't the only conflicts in the house. For the last 2 years, Astrid had gotten to work teaching her children how to read. Finn had mastered it within a year but Adriana had a strange aversion to her studies and no amount of prodding from Astrid could get her to focus. At age 7, she still couldn't read even the most basic words. What Hiccup didn't know was that Astrid specifically timed her lessons so that he wouldn't be in the house. These lessons were more like screaming matches that often ended with Adriana in tears. But things were beginning to come to an unavoidable boiling point now that 3/4 of the family took issue with each other. Finn, who was beginning to feel like a bit of an outsider, had taken to spending as much time away from the house as he could when everyone was home. So far, there hadn't been a blow-up. But it was only a matter of time. Hiccup hoped that the anger management class he was going to attempt to teach would help his family deal with their own issues as well. And perhaps he could have a civilized conversation with his wife. It was worth a shot. Since becoming chief, Hiccup had learned quite a few little tricks when it came to dealing with people. For example, being calm in a crisis was definitely an underrated skill. He also learned that no amount of pleading would get anyone to listen to him, so he had to be firm and unwavering in his convictions. But the trick he most commonly used was one he learned from a singer to prevent his throat from going hoarse after a day of shouting so that everyone could hear him, whether it was over 2 fighting children or a room full of whispering Vikings. In order to get the most volume and avoid straining his voice, he learned to breathe with his diaphragm before speaking. The first time he had done this, he had caught himself off guard with the sound bursting from his throat, but he had since learned how to use it to his advantage. Of course, proper breathing techniques could only get him so far. And an entire arena full of grumpy Vikings of all ages was already going to be hard enough. Trying to talk over them would be next to impossible. Hiccup thought irritably that perhaps he should have considered this before insisting that everyone attend. Guys, he called as loudly as he could. Can you all just settle down? We could get this over a lot faster if, guys, everyone, hey. He bounced a bit as he attempted to make himself look a bit taller, but it was to no avail. Come on. Just a few minutes of your... Shut up. Rough Nut hollered quite suddenly. A hush fell over the crowd. Hiccup beamed at her. Thank you, Rough. So right. The hooligan chief straightened up and began to pace in front of the chalkboard he used at the academy, fiddling with fresh chalk in his left hand. As you know, there are a lot of disagreements on Burke. Daily, actually. More like every few hours he cleared his throat and licked his lips, beginning to regret not having rehearsed his speech the night before. But that's all going to change. With a few tips on anger management, you'll be able to handle your own disputes. Astrid turned her derisive laugh into a coughing fit. Unabashed, Hiccup continued. So the first thing I was thinking about teaching you all is proper breathing techniques, he announced, ceasing his pacing and standing in front of the crowd. We're breathing wrong. I didn't know there was a wrong way to breathe. Tough Nut called from toward the back of the arena. Not what I meant. I mean you need to breathe different when you're upset. Here, stand up straight, shoulders back. There were loud scraping noises as his people reluctantly rose from their seats. Now take a deep breath. Hold it, and then release. This is stupid, said Snot Loud rather loudly rather than actually obey. How will we ever use this in a conflict? Easy. We could breathe in and blow our opponent ever. Is that what you're going to teach us? Roughnut leaned forward a bit, suddenly eager. No. That's not, no, come on. Hiccup rolled his eyes. This is about managing your anger so you can channel it constructively and not need me to come break up fights. Wait. You mean you're not teaching us how to fight with each other? Tough Nut looked scandalized. Of course not, why would I teach you that? Your fighting is why I'm here. It's about time someone put a stop to it. Hiccup sighed, his breathing techniques forgotten. The crowd was beginning to murmur amongst themselves. Apparently Hiccup hadn't explained what he meant by anger management classes in a clear enough fashion. He growled in frustration. 2 years as chief and he still made incredibly stupid mistakes. However, this now meant he had 2 years of experience talking himself out of embarrassing situations. All right, I can see there's been a bit of a miscommunication, he called over the muttering, which was steadily rising in volume. I'm teaching you all how to manage your anger so that when you are in conflict, you can solve it yourselves. This will be really helpful in the long run and hopefully prevent a lot of avoidable accidents and injuries. At this point, no one was paying attention to their chief. Finn and Helga Ingerman, who had been poking each other since the start of the class, had started to argue in hushed tones. Inga Jorgensen and Gunnar Ingerman were having a similar dispute a few rows back. Astrid leaned back and decided to enjoy watching her husband struggle as more and more altercations were beginning to take place all over the arena. Now if you could just settle down, I could teach you how to Finn, for the love of Thor, do not push Helga, she's a lot smaller than you, teach you how to control your mulch, bucket, stop hitting each other, control your anger. Hiccup was beginning to gesture wildly in a vain attempt to restore control. So after you take your rough, tough, this is not a war meeting, put down the daggers, your deep breaths, just tell yourself Finn, let go of Edgar's shirt, tell yourself to relax and stop fuming and, take it, take it. Hiccup put his head in his hands, balling his fists so tightly that his fingernails came dangerously close to cutting into his palms. Oh forget it, he suddenly bellowed. The jarring, unrestrained shout from their leader hushed the hooligans in a second, but Hiccup didn't notice this. Astrid smirked. Here came the show. You know what? Fine. Just freak out and hit each other with your maces and axes and whatever else you find lying around, because I'm done. I have better things to do than to come and solve every one of your problems. He threw the chalk down, causing it to snap in half. I don't know how my dad did it. Why is it my job to make you act like civilized human beings? Well, you know what? I'm not doing it anymore. He was running his fingers through his hair, grabbing clumps of it and pulling so hard he could feel the individual hairs snapping. I quit. When you need me for an actual chiefly duty that doesn't involve nearly being beaten over the head 10 times a day, come and find me. With that, he stomped out of the arena, his metal foot making a very loud noise every other step. Toothless, who was waiting outside, cooed in concern, but Hiccup shook his head. He had long since learned that flying while angry was something he would do well to avoid when possible. The Night Fury followed his livid rider away from the crowd. Had Hiccup stopped his ragged breathing for even a second, he might have noticed a silence coming from the arena as everyone watched him stomp away until he was out of sight. For a moment, all was calm and quiet. Astrid looked around in amusement at her fellow hooligans, most of whom had never seen their chief throw a fit like that. A few months ago, Hiccup might have had a bit more patience before snapping, but she had noticed that his tolerance was being stripped away little by little over the last few weeks. She hoped no one would try to talk to her about it. Finally, Gobber stepped forward to the now vacated spot at the front of the crowd. You know, Hiccup has a point, he admitted with a shrug. Perhaps we would all benefit from learning how to not attack each other when conflicts arise. There was a murmur of assent. Ironically, now that the hooligans had seen firsthand how ridiculous fits of anger looked to other people, they were beginning to see the point in the lesson. Well, that was just great. Real leadership skills there. Astrid remarked sardonically as she walked into the Haddock home, slamming the door behind her. Hiccup hummed in an irritated sort of way but did not respond. He had spent a good portion of the morning catching up on a few inventing projects he had been putting off. His charcoal scraped against the parchment as he wrote out some designs for even better and sturdier catapults to replace the ones that had broken. Astrid's interruption was not appreciated. Oh okay. Don't bother you. Got it. Astrid rolled her eyes and stomped up the stairs, intending to take a short nap before going back out into the town square. She had spent the morning covering for her husband and thought it was well deserved. How had Hiccup's life become so full of conflict? A year ago, everything had been fine. His kids were happy, his wife was happy, his dragon was happy and he was becoming a very good actor. But things change when anyone carries around guilt long enough. Even the biggest of smiles can only hide the darkness inside so much. But hadn't he done his best to move on? Hadn't he spent countless nights convincing himself that he had made the right choice? No, he thought irritably. He had done the right thing. It was only natural to feel guilty. It was Astrid who was being unreasonable, who was becoming grouchy and mean-spirited these days. And his children were getting older. Of course their polar opposite personalities would cause more conflict now that they were developing. Surely it wasn't his fault that everything had gone so badly so fast. He was doing the best he could. He shook his head to clear his mind of his doubts and went back to working on his designs. He would deal with it another day. Chapter 2, The Stampede. Chapter text. Any self-respecting 7-year-old boy will tell you that he's not afraid of anything. Finn took his first name very seriously and strived to emulate it in any way possible. He didn't show weakness. He didn't cry and he certainly didn't need his parents to get him out of trouble. He could handle anything life threw his way, from his broken ankle the previous year to the arguing he pretended he couldn't hear each night before he went to bed. 2 days after the disastrous anger management class, Finn found himself in yet another conflict, this time with his mother. Out! Astrid shrieked, pushing her small son out of the house with gusto. If you're going to make messes, you're going to stay outside for the rest of the day. The door slammed, making the boy jump slightly. Finn scowled at the house, his heart pounding and his chest filled with righteous anger. How dare she kick him out for this? How dare she refuse to listen to him? He was shaking with fury, walking down the hill to the village with his hands in his pockets, angrily kicking small stones out of the way. The hooligans out in the village square kept their distance from the livid boy. Finn had definitely inherited his mother's temper and no one felt safe setting him off, even with a friendly comment. However, just as everyone was intentionally giving the boy a wide berth, a screaming voice pierced the air. Out! Heather screamed, shoving her husband out the door with surprising strength for a woman carrying a toddler. Get out of this house right now. I never want to see you again. Snotlout stared at his wife, his mouth bobbing up and down like a fish before he finally found his voice. I was just sharpening my axe. Oh really? Well, why don't you take your precious axe? After all you've done to me, you might as well just keep it. An axe came whizzing out of the door, coming very close to chopping the man in half. Heather, honey. Snotlout whimpered, getting a last look at his wife before she slammed the door in his face. He gritted his teeth. 5 more days. Finn, who had been watching the scene unfold with mild fascination, spoke up. 5 more days till what? Until she starts acting like herself again. Snotlout replied, still glaring at the door. Always the last day of the month, I might as well stay away from the house until it's over, he muttered furiously. Why was she so upset? Get yourself a lady friend, an older hooligan man asked, winking at Snotlout. What? No. No, I would never. What's a lady friend? Both men looked down at Finn as if they had only just noticed he was standing there. Snotlout's face went beet red in half a second as the man who had asked took off in the opposite direction. Finn's eyes were wide with innocent curiosity. And Snotlout wasn't about to smash that innocence to bits. Not today, anyway. It's a lady who is friends with a man, he replied, picking up his axe and swinging it over his shoulder in an attempt to distract the boy. It didn't. So, is Anna Eric's lady friend? Snotlout wasn't sure whether to let out the bubble of laughter rising in his chest at the innocent question. He decided to shove it down. No, he's not, only men have lady friends. Oh. Finn said, furrowing his eyebrows for a second as he processed this information. Okay then. Snotlout was relieved that this very awkward conversation seemed to come to a close. For about a second. Then he took in the boy's hunched shoulders, the hands in the pockets, the lips pressed tightly together. He knew this look far too well, though it was usually Astrid who maintained this posture. "So what's the matter?" he asked, deciding that it would be better to change the subject than to allow the boy to ask any more questions about the previous topic. "Nothing." Finn spat, kicking another rock with the toe of his boot. Snotlout gave the boy a second glance, just enough to know that he had told him a pretty big lie. If it truly was nothing, Finn would be running around town asking lots of questions and trying to help out the large men with their work. This gave him a sudden idea. "Want to help me chop firewood?" Finn stared at him for a moment, eyeing the axe over his father's friend's shoulder, and nodded. Snotlout considered taking the boy's hand as they walked into the woods, but he thought that Finn was a bit too old to have his hand held by anyone other than his mother. Not to mention, the boy could pack a mean punch, and he had been fortunate enough to not yet be on the receiving end. He had been present when Tough Nut picked on Astrid, in a good-natured way, but Finn didn't quite understand it yet, and had received a fistful of the boy's wrath. No, Snotlout didn't want a similar fate. They walked in silence until they reached a small clearing. Snotlout found a good-sized tree to chop down for firewood. He enjoyed this task immensely. It gave him just enough alone time to process everything that had happened while there wasn't too much, otherwise he would get bored. Finn watched him chop the tree several times before sitting down and putting his head in his clenched fists. Snotlout finally put down the axe. "All right, Finn, tell me what's bothering you." "Nothing." Finn repeated irritably. "Yeah, sure. Nothing." Snotlout rolled his eyes. "You're not a very good liar." "Forget it." Finn mumbled, looking down at his lap. "No, I'm not going to forget it. At least not until you tell me what's going on." Snotlout crouched down so that he was at the boy's level. Finn shook his head. Snotlout growled in frustration for a second before he got a burst of inspiration. "Tell me what's wrong and I'll eat this live grasshopper." He picked up the creature, who immediately tried to hop out of his hand as if it knew its fate. Finn looked up, eyeing the bug and then looking back at Snotlout. His daddy's friend wasn't about to do something so gross, though the boy was tempted to use this bribe on someone else one day. Still, it would be fun watching Snotlout try to explain his way out of not eating the wretched thing. "Mom kicked me out," he said, sighing deeply as if resigned to his end of the deal. "She says I made a big mess in the kitchen." "Well, did you?" "No." "Well, not this time," Finn exclaimed, waving his arms around in a way that reminded Snotlout of Hiccup. "Anna's been trying to cook and she made a huge mess, and then she went out because she wanted to tell Eric, and Mom came home and yelled at me just cause I was standing there, and she thought I made the mess, and when I told her I didn't, she said I was lying and then threw me out." He said all of this in one breath and had to gasp loudly the second he was finished. "Ah," Snotlout said, a small smile on his face. "So you're upset because your mom blamed you for something your sister did?" Finn nodded. "Well, bottoms up." Finn's mouth dropped open as he watched Snotlout open his mouth, tip his head back, and drop the grasshopper into his mouth. He gulped and looked back at the boy, who was now in awe of his father's friend. Why hadn't his father ever told him how cool Uncle Snotlout was? "What? I told you I'd do it. You didn't think I was lying, did you?" Snotlout chuckled at the boy's awed expression. "No, yes. I don't know." Finn shrugged. "Can I eat a grasshopper?" Snotlout's chuckle turned into an uproarious laugh. "I think your parents might not want you to." "My parents don't care what I do unless it makes a big mess." Finn shook his head and traced another grasshopper's movement with his eyes. "I don't think that's true." Snotlout sat down next to the boy, deciding that now was as good a time as any for a break. He had a feeling he would be talking to his friend's son for a little while. "I think your parents are just frustrated." "Frustrated with what?" "I don't make that many messes." Finn grabbed a stick and began to draw little pictures in the dirt. "With each other mostly." "And your sister?" "I don't know what's going on, but sometimes grown-ups take their anger out on the wrong people." Snotlout patted the boy on the shoulder. "I think your mom does care about you." "Actually, I know she does." "And your dad is weird." Finn raised his eyebrows at this comment, making Snotlout chuckle. Yeah, he is. And I think he shows how much he cares in a different way that not everyone can understand. Except your mom and probably Anna. How's this going to help me? Finn asked. Snotlout took a moment to think about this legitimate question. Well, I think if you point out your accomplishments instead of expecting your parents to just notice them, you'd probably get a lot more attention. I did that as a kid and my dad still talks about some of the stuff I did. What kind of accomplishments? What did you do when you were a kid? Well. Snotlout smiled at a sudden memory that popped into his head. When I was about 8, I think, I caught a wild boar. Best bacon I've ever had. Finn furrowed his brows in deep thought. Okay. He suddenly stood up, a mischievous gleam in his eye. I think I'm going to go now. You don't want to stick around and watch me cut down this tree? Snotlout asked, picking up his axe again. Finn shook his head. No, I just have to go. Suit yourself. Let me know if you need any firewood. Your dad seems pretty busy. Snotlout chopped at the tree once more. I will. Finn called, taking off into the forest. Branches snapped underneath the boy's feet as he pelted as fast as he could toward, well, quite frankly, he didn't know where he was going. He figured he would know when he got there. He felt a tingling inside of him, the sort of tingling he got when he knew he was about to go on an adventure. He wasn't sure how far he ran or where, exactly, he was when he finally stopped to catch his breath. He had reached a large clearing filled with grazing boars. The large, fat beasts caught his attention and he stood still, watching them traipse around and snack on the fresh grass. Any one of them would be quite a catch. The hooligans rarely hunted for boars because it was a lot of effort for food that they could more easily get from plants and fish. Finn had never tasted bacon, but he had heard others call it Valhalla on a plate, so he was quite eager to try it. He crept up behind a large rock, fully aware that his vivid hair would probably be easily noticeable if any of the boars turned in his direction. He bit his lip and crouched down so that he couldn't be seen. He needed a plan. If Snotlout could catch a boar at age 8, surely he, the son of the chief, could catch one at age 7. He heard footsteps just outside of the rock. Hooves were barely visible on the side now as one of the boars had shifted positions. Little did it know that it was in the perfect position. It wasn't as big as some of the others. Why, Finn could tackle it and stab it with the dagger he carried on his belt in seconds. Then he could carry it back to the village and everyone would talk about how fearless Finn Haddock had been the youngest person in the whole world to kill a boar single-handedly. As slowly and quietly as he could, the boy sneaked up behind the smaller boar. It didn't seem to notice his presence at all. Until it was suddenly saddled with 60 extra pounds. It certainly noticed that. And with a loud, indignant squeal, the other boars were aware of its predicament. Finn realized, too late, that boars were very fast runners. He suddenly found himself propelled forward, nearly falling off the beast's back but managing to hold on to its long hair. The boar did not seem to appreciate this and attempted to buck him off. Now all the boars were running around, all panicking and all squealing so loudly, Finn was afraid he would be deaf by the end of this adventure. Suddenly, almost as if the boars had a secret language made entirely of ear-shattering squeals, all of the animals began to run in one direction, directly into the woods. Finn buried his face in the boar he was riding, too terrified to jump off and risk being trampled by the others behind it. He prayed that this ordeal would be over soon. Astrid was having a surprisingly good morning. Adriana had come down to breakfast on time and with only a few extra knots in her hair. Hiccup had been pleasant and had even kissed her goodbye. It looked like the kind of day she would get to spend completely, blissfully alone. She and Stormfly landed after a leisurely flight during the midday while everyone was out and about doing their jobs and greeting their friends. It looked like it was going to be an ordinary and quite pleasant summer day. Unfortunately, she had forgotten the first thing she ever learned about being a mother: surprises happen. As she walked through the square, saying hello and waving to those she passed, she noticed Stormfly suddenly tense. "What is it, girl?" she asked, gently patting the deadly nadder on the snout. All of the dragons seemed to sense that something was coming now. The Burkians looked from one dragon to the next, all confused but beginning to feel a bit on edge. Suddenly, a loud voice from close to the great hole pierced the air. "Everybody get inside," shouted Hiccup, running down the hill and trying to scatter children who were playing in the dirt. Just as Astrid was about to ask her husband what was going on, she heard what her dragon had heard before her. Faint squeals, thundering hoofbeats, a stampede was imminent and coming quite a bit faster than anyone could anticipate. The square was clearing when the first of dozens of boars emerged from the woods. Astrid was dismayed to see a mop of red hair on top of one of the smaller boars who seemed to be leading the pack in its frenzied rampaging through town. Finn was a boisterous boy, but even he had more sense than that, didn't he? She tore after her son, her dragon forgotten, and was just closing in on the boar carrying her little boy when it finally bucked him off. Her heart stopped for a moment as she watched him fly into the air, arms and legs flailing. Her body relaxed when, with a loud squelch, her son landed on a large pile of fish. "Fearless Finn Haddock," she bellowed as she quickened her pace toward the boy. "What in Thor's name were you thinking?" Finn looked a bit disoriented but otherwise unhurt. And now he reeked of raw fish. He turned his gaze to his mother and looked thoroughly ashamed of himself. "I wasn't." "No, you certainly weren't." Astrid grabbed him by the upper arm and yanked him up. "You are in big trouble, young man." Finn hung his head in shame. Mother and son turned to march home and were greeted by a truly terrifying sight. Though the dragons had stepped up and were dispersing the boars quite nicely, one of the biggest of the herd was pelting directly at Inga Jorgensen. The little girl seemed frozen in fear and, out of the corner of her eye, Astrid saw Snotlout running at full speed toward her. He would never make it to her in time. Hiccup, however, had noticed this as well. He dived at the girl and barely managed to push her out of the way before being pitched over the boar and onto the ground. The other boars were beginning to run back into the woods, so Snotlout had a clear path to his daughter. "Thank you," he said to Hiccup, taking a moment to help his chief to his feet. Hiccup waved a hand as a response, using his other hand to massage his ribs. Snotlout picked up his daughter and the two of them headed home. If only the happiness of this reunion could have spread to the hooligan chief and his errant son. Hiccup marched down the hill to where Astrid and Finn were standing. Finn tried to hide behind his mother, but she wasn't about to let him shy away. "Fearless Finn Haddock!" Hiccup shouted. Finn winced. That was twice he had been addressed by his full name. "What possessed you to upset a pack of wild boars? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? You could have killed someone. You almost did." The chief's hands flailed about as he berated his son, who was looking more and more ashamed of his actions by the second. Everyone who was still out in the square was beginning to feel extremely uncomfortable. When Hiccup paused for breath, Astrid saw her opportunity and spoke up. "Hiccup, come on, lighten up," she snapped. "He didn't mean to do it, did you?" She turned to her son, who shook his head. Hiccup opened his mouth to retort when Gobber rested an arm on his shoulder. He shut it with a snap, his green eyes piercing Finn's blue ones. Just take him home. I don't want to deal with him right now." Hiccup seethed. "I have his mess to clean up." Astrid stiffened, her mouth dropping open. "Excuse me," she said in a low, dangerous tone. "How many messes did your father clean up? How many times did you almost burn down the village?" Hiccup's face turned beet red. "I got punished. And so will Finn," she yelled back. "You don't have to rub it in." "Well, take comfort." Hiccup threw up his arms in disgust. "He's got some of me in his blood after all." Astrid trembled with rage but decided that she would take it out on her husband later. "Come on," she said to her son, still gripping his upper arm as she marched him back to the house. Adriana was glad she lived slightly farther from the village than most houses. She and Eric had been continuing their cooking lesson when they heard loud squealing coming from the village. They ran out just in time to see a pack of boars dispersing and running into the woods. It was definitely a good thing they weren't in the square. A few minutes later, however, they caught sight of Astrid yanking a disgruntled Finn back to the house. Eric began to feel incredibly uncomfortable. "I should go," he said, giving Adriana an apologetic look. Adriana nodded and watched him scamper back into the village, giving Astrid and Finn a wide berth as he did. When Astrid caught sight of her daughter, covered with cooking ingredients, some of her anger turned to shame. Did you make that mess in the kitchen this morning? She asked her daughter. Adriana nodded. I'm sorry, Mommy. Astrid suddenly felt the urge to punch something, but she wasn't about to hit her children. I will deal with you later, young lady, she said as she passed her daughter on the way into the house. As soon as they got to Finn's room, Astrid pushed him in and shut the door behind them. I'm sorry, Mom, I wasn't thinking. Finn cried, his hands running through his hair in a way that was strangely reminiscent of his father. I know you didn't mean it. Astrid conceded. And I owe you an apology, buddy. Finn looked up at his mother, dumbfounded. I shouldn't have blamed you for the mess in the kitchen. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Finn bit his lip. It's okay, Mom, he said after a few seconds. But that doesn't excuse you from punishment. What you did today was very dangerous and very stupid. Astrid sat him down on the bed and put an arm around him. Why did you do it? I just wanted to catch a ball like all the big Viking men. Like Poppy. Finn admitted with his eyes fixed on his knees. Astrid put a hand on his chin and turned his head up so that he was facing her. The time for chasing down boars and doing all the things big Viking men do will come before you know it. She brushed his bangs out from in front of his eyes and made a mental note to give him a haircut. But you can't do things like that anymore. Do you understand? Finn nodded. Am I getting punished? Oh yes. Astrid smiled. You are not to leave this house for a week. A week. Finn's mouth dropped open. A week. Except to help clean up your mess. If I catch you outside without your dad or someone to supervise you while you're working, it'll be another week. Astrid stood up. You need to think about what you've done, young man. And all the trouble you've caused. Finn stuck out his lip in a pout, but as his mother shut the door, he thought that perhaps he deserved his punishment. After all, he had almost gotten Inga killed. He made a mental note not to try anything that dangerous again. The next time he needed to rebel, he would be much more subtle. Astrid was ascending the staircase when Hiccup finally pushed open the door to his house. Their eyes met for a second. You're home late, she said in monotone. Busy day. No thanks to our son. Hiccup took off his coat and hung it on a hook. He's being punished. Good. There was another pause. Astrid tensed slightly, her hand gripping the railing. Aren't you coming up to bed? Hiccup shook his head, still not meeting her gaze. I have some things to work on first. Astrid nodded and, without saying another word, walked up the stairs in silence. She had a strong feeling that Hiccup wasn't remaining downstairs just to get some work done. He had done a lot of late-night projects over the last month or so. Her theory was proven correct the next morning when his side of the bed was empty. She got out of the bed and tiptoed down the stairs. He was lying on the couch, fast asleep and curled up in a blanket. Blinking back tears, Astrid climbed back up the stairs and went back into their room. The silence of the master bedroom began to echo in her ears, and before she knew it, she couldn't hold back her sobs any longer. What she didn't know was that the wall between her bedroom and Finn's was quite a bit thinner than she realized. And Finn, always the early riser, could hear every sound she was making. Chapter 3, Final Blow. Chapter text. 2 years ago. The pain was agonizing. Spreading from his chest, from his neck, from his arms, but he had to get up. He wasn't dead yet. Hiccup sat up and looked at his adversary. Dager stared at him in shock. What? I'm sorry, Dager. Hiccup breathed into his face. But I can't let you win. Dager made a move to grab the dagger sticking out of Hiccup's chest, but the hooligan quickly collided the berserker's nose with his forehead. Dager cried out, recoiling back. Hiccup wrapped his right leg around the back of Dager's left knee, pulled back and shoved Dager forward. Dager's leg slipped out from under him and he screamed in shock. He grabbed Hiccup's arm, pulling him over the edge with him. Hiccup's stomach slammed into toothless black hide and Dager's hand slipped from his. Hiccup watched Dager plummet toward the rocks below with wide eyes. Toothless yanked to a halt, hovering in place to watch the enemy fall and smash into the rocks with a sickening crack that set Hiccup's teeth on edge. In a daze, he watched Dager lie there, completely unmoving, watched as the small pool of blood formed underneath Dager's head. Hiccup gasped as he awoke, feeling trapped by the blankets tightly wrapped around his body. It took a little while to loosen them enough to slip out, but he managed to extricate himself from his own bed. Astrid slept on, completely unburdened. Good. She didn't need to be disturbed. The young chief winced as he turned his head. The gash on his neck was healing quite nicely, but it still throbbed uncomfortably, especially on nights like this. He smoothed out the blankets so that Astrid wouldn't be cold and found himself in a bit of a conundrum. He could try to crawl back into bed so he could, no. His heart was still pounding, his head still reeling with memories he desperately wanted to keep down. He wasn't going to get any more sleep tonight. There was always the saddle adjustment he'd been working on. That might distract him. His metal leg made an odd clunking noise as he descended the staircase. He wondered how long it would take to get used to his new prosthetic. A few months perhaps. Who knew, really? Hiccup lit a candle and placed it over his work table. He blinked a few times to try and clear his vision before getting out some parchment and trying to draw up a design. He would measure Toothless later. His night fury was likely to be asleep. No one was awake at that hour. Or were they? There was a strange noise above his head. He froze, straining his ears so he could hear it more clearly. Footsteps. Little footsteps. Finn or Adriana had awakened. A second later, Hiccup knew exactly who was awake and exactly why. Addie. The footsteps stopped for a moment. It's okay, Addie, it's me. The noise traveled down the stairs and within seconds, a tiny girl, her hair messy and her hand clasped around a stuffed night fury, came into view. Hiccup smiled grimly. Bad dreams again, he kept his voice soft to avoid waking up the rest of his family. Adriana nodded, wiping her eyes with her arm. She looked like she had been awake for a while. Perhaps the noises Hiccup was making as he descended the staircase had alarmed her. Why didn't you come to us? Her father asked, looking concerned. I didn't want to wake you up. Adriana replied in a higher register. Why are you awake? I had a bad dream too. Hiccup said after a moment's hesitation. Adriana stared at her father, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. I thought grown-ups didn't have bad dreams. Hiccup chuckled. He thought it was a bit cruel to be amused that his daughter would think such a thing. She almost always crawled into bed with her parents after her nightmares. Why wouldn't she assume that she would outgrow them? Yet another thing to add to the harsh realities from which he would not be able to shield her. One down, 1,000 more to go. Sometimes grown-ups have a lot of bad dreams after something bad happens to them. Hiccup motioned for her to come forward. She tentatively walked up to him. And something very bad happened to me. I got hurt by an evil man who wanted to take you away. And sometimes when I go to sleep, you're scared again. 'Cause even though he's gone in real life, he won't go away from your dreams. Adriana interrupted, her green eyes fixed on his. Hiccup paused for a few minutes, staring at his daughter, who understood. Gods, why didn't he think of that? She had been crawling into bed with him and Astrid for the past year and a half. And yet here he was, keeping secrets from his family because he didn't want to burden them. But his little girl had already been burdened. She knew his fear. She had been facing it longer than he had. Do they ever go away? His daughter asked, breaking the silence at last. Hiccup opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He blinked a few times. A father is supposed to know the answers to the important questions. Yet he didn't know. She had voiced his greatest fear, that he would never get away. That he would be haunted by the most horrifying experience of his life until he died. He couldn't answer. He stared into her wide eyes and noticed, for the first time, that they seemed older. Like a weary old woman had been trapped inside of his child's body. A woman who had gone through so much pain and who wanted to be free. He hated it. The torture she endured on so many nights. The fear she faced every single day. The times she was thrown into the most terrible moments of her life. Always over her shoulder, always haunting her like a dark shadow in the corner of her eye that lingered but never came into focus. He knew because it was his turn to experience it. He had felt the fear, been thrown into his nightmares even during daylight. He had felt his past following him, sometimes so closely he could almost touch it. Was this what his daughter had faced for the last year and a half? He leaned forward and put his arms around her, hugging her tightly as if holding her would make her feel safe again, would banish the monster of her own mind for good. She held him as if she was trying to do the same thing. Her question still echoed in his mind. Would the nightmares ever go away? I don't know, Addie, he whispered in a trembling voice. But I do know that you don't have to face this alone anymore. Present day. Agonizing pain ripped through his chest as he lay there, Dager the deranged triumphantly leering down at him. A burst of strength Hiccup didn't know he had coursed through him and he sat up. Dager stared at him in shock. What? I'm sorry, Dager. Hiccup breathed into his face. But I can't let you win. Though Dager made a move to extricate the dagger from Hiccup's chest, the hooligan was too fast for him. His head collided with the berserker's, causing Dager to cry out and recoil. Hiccup wasted no time in wrapping his right leg around the back of Dager's left knee, pulling back, and shoving Dager forward. Dager's leg slipped out from under him and he screamed in shock. He grabbed Hiccup's arm, pulling him over the edge with him. Hiccup's stomach slammed into toothless black hide and Dager's hand slipped from his. Dager was screaming. The sound echoed in his head until there was a sickening crack and all went silent. Dazed, he watched Dager lie there, completely unmoving, watched as the small pool of blood formed underneath the now dead berserker's head. Hiccup awoke with a jolt. He was covered in a cold sweat and his heart was pounding in his ears. It was that dream again. The same dream he had almost every night. He put a hand up to his neck and felt the scars on his skin, which stung as a result of the dream but had, in actuality, healed quite a while ago. He looked over to the other side of the bed and was slightly relieved to see that Astrid slept on, undeterred by her husband's nightmare. There would be no more sleep that night. Hiccup knew that he could probably crawl back into bed at dawn and fall asleep instantly, but he only got an hour or so before his wife woke him. Judging by the angle of the moonlight in the window, he guessed that it was about 2 in the morning. He had only gotten 3 hours of sleep. All in all, a typical night's rest. He thought irritably that Astrid oughtn't he have asked him to sleep next to her since he wouldn't even spend most of the night with her. Surely she had to know that. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and sat up, careful not to disturb his wife's slumber. The last thing he needed was her asking questions he didn't want to answer. Only one person truly understood and she slept in the bedroom farthest down the hall. He yawned as he traipsed down the stairs. He had some designs he could work on in the hours before he would be able to sleep again. No one was downstairs. It was rather peaceful to work in the early hours of the morning. This particular morning, however, he found himself hoping for company. Adriana had been joining him on some of the nights when he couldn't fall back to sleep due to nightmares. As Hiccup drew up some designs for a more efficient tail control for Toothless, his mind wandered a bit. How long had it been since they had started doing this? 2 years. Yes, it must have been about 2 years now. Neither he nor his daughter had ever told Astrid or Finn that they had late-night meetings. There was something special about them, like their monthly Saturdays together. Something that was completely and irrevocably theirs. His wish for company soon came true. The young girl descended the staircase about an hour later. She was pleased to see that her father was already awake. Some nights she was alone. She didn't like those nights, the ones in which she lit a candle in her room and prayed that daylight would come soon. Her father, her sole confidant in these matters, was much better company when they were undisturbed by the rest of the family. I had a feeling you'd be coming down. Hiccup smiled warmly and opened an arm so that he could comfort his still shaking child. She immediately allowed him to hold her close, placing a head on his shoulder. Really bad one, huh? Adriana nodded. Do you want to talk about it? The girl sniffled and shook her head. She told her father everything, except what was in her nightmares. The scenes she had to relive almost every night were impossible to put into words. He had given up pressing for details because they tended to trigger flashbacks that could take hours from which to recover. You don't have to tell me what happened in your dream. Hiccup said, tenderly rubbing her shoulder so that it would be warm and, hopefully, she would stop shaking. But you were so little when it happened. How much do you remember? Adriana bit her lip, her eyes fixed on her fidgeting fingers. All of it. I know the feeling. Hiccup kissed her on the top of the head. Some things you just can't forget. No matter how much you want to. Adriana finished with another sniffle. What are you working on? Oh, this. Just some designs for a new tail fin for Toothless. I'm not sure I'm actually going to build it. Something seems off about it. Hiccup pushed the papers a bit closer to his daughter so that she see the pictures, even if she couldn't read the words. Adriana's tongue darted between her parted lips. It was a sign that she was concentrating with all her might, and Hiccup found it cute. Not to mention somewhat familiar. Wouldn't it fall apart? She asked after about a minute. Hiccup eyed the design again. Why would it fall apart? Well. Adriana seemed to enjoy her moment of brilliance. Her eyes flitted to her father's face, which she knew would light up when she shared her theory. You put the metal bit in a different place. Yes. It has better wind resistance. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. Well, if you moved the tail to the side, it would rip cause there's no support. Adriana pointed to the floor. Toothless would crash. And then he'd pout. He always pouts when he's clumsy. Hiccup smiled. Too true. He looked over the plans again. All right, that's the last time I try to do any work in the middle of the night. Adriana giggled and Hiccup tightened his hold on her shoulder. What's going on here? Father and daughter turned around, identical pairs of green eyes widening as they focused on the rigid form of Astrid, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, and her eyes narrowed. Hiccup knew his wife's mannerisms like the back of his hand, but it didn't take much observation skills to figure out that she was livid. Addie and I are just talking, he said after a few seconds. He had waited a bit too long. Astrid's body stiffened. In the middle of the night, she asked with a voice as tense as her posture. We couldn't sleep. Adriana mumbled. Nightmares. Hiccup wished she hadn't verbalized that last part, but he conceded that their late-night meetings couldn't go unnoticed forever. And he wasn't about to ask her to lie. Nightmares. Astrid's eyes bored into her husband's. What sort of nightmares? Hiccup was beginning to feel distinctly annoyed now. Same as they've always been. Astrid looked from her husband to her daughter and back several times. Hiccup's arm was still draped around the girl's shoulders, almost like it was instinctual. Almost like he was protecting her from her own mother. She gritted her teeth, trying hard not to raise her voice. How long has this been going on? She asked in a voice that dripped with false nonchalance. Adriana felt Hiccup's arm stiffen around her shoulders. Since the nightmares started, he said, his eyes fixed on Astrid's as if silently challenging her. We understand what it's like to be hesitant to go back to sleep. Astrid's eyebrows raised. 2 years, she huffed, her teeth gritting together almost painfully in her mouth. 2 years. We didn't want to wake you up. Adriana admitted, her gaze now focused on her feet. Go upstairs to bed, Anna. Astrid pointed in the direction of her daughter's room. But. Just go, sweetie. I'll be up in a minute. Hiccup gently pushed the girls back. The couple watched their daughter climb up the stairs and remained silent until they heard her door shut behind her. No more of these late-night meetings. She needs sleep. You need sleep. Astrid said after a few seconds of tense silence. She needs someone to talk to. Hiccup shook his head. And you wouldn't understand. Don't tell me what I can and can't understand. Astrid snapped, her voice a bit louder than perhaps it should have been. You've been pushing Finn and me away. Hiccup couldn't stop himself from laughing. I'm not doing anything. I'm just being there for my daughter. It's no wonder she can't read if she isn't getting enough sleep. Astrid snarled. I don't care what you get up to at all hours of the night, but letting her stay up and have these little meetings is irresponsible. Hiccup stood up, smirking as he now stared down at his wife's face. She's still scared. So tell her she'll be fine and to go back to sleep. Astrid didn't even bother to keep her voice down. I'm not having this conversation with you. Hiccup pushed past her and grabbed his coat. Where are you going? Astrid balled her fists. To kiss my daughter goodnight and then for a walk. Hiccup glared at her as he ascended the staircase. You can't just keep running away. Astrid shouted. Hiccup stared at her for a few seconds before averting his eyes and arriving at the top of the stairs. Astrid could hear him open Adriana's bedroom door and shut it behind him. The air was nippy before the sun rose above the horizon. Hiccup managed to calm his frightened daughter by telling her that the stuffed night fury he had made for her 3.5 years previously would keep her safe. It was a lie he frequently repeated and, though she was no longer naive enough to believe him, she seemed to take comfort in it anyway. He kept his gaze on the ground, watching his foot and prosthetic take each step with mild interest. His chilled hands were in his pockets and his breath rose in front of his face in little clouds that would likely disappear once the weather turned warmer. He hardly noticed where he was going until a large body stepped in front of him from an adjacent street. His prosthetic scraped in the dirt when he halted and the large man jerked in his direction at the sudden sound. Hiccup. Fish legs. The men recognized and called the other by name simultaneously. They stared at each other in shock for a moment, confused at seeing the other at such a late hour. Fish legs looked at his friend, who looked distinctly upset about something. He thought it would be pointless to ask about the cause of his foul mood. Hiccup had taken to simply glaring at anyone who wanted to talk to him about anything family or emotions related. What are you doing out? Hiccup asked after a few very confusing seconds. Peary woke up in the middle of the night. Ruff and I calmed her down but now I can't get back to sleep. Fish legs shrugged. I'm used to it by now. Well, with 5 kids, I'd hope so. Hiccup gave his friend a half-hearted smile. You and Ruff done yet? Probably not. I hated being an only child and Ruff always wanted more than just Tough to keep her company. We want a big family. Fish legs chuckled. Before we started dating, I would never have guessed Ruff was the maternal type. I guess people never stop surprising you. Yeah. Hiccup shook his head. Well, that's great. Have a nice walk. Hiccup turned his thin frame down a side street, but Fish legs stopped him with a large hand outstretched. Wait. Fish legs took a step closer. Are you okay? You've been off. Off. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. Off how? Hiccup. I mean, a lot of us have been thinking it. Fish legs took a deep breath. Lately you've been kind of short-tempered. You don't like to talk to people. You keep to yourself. We're not sure why. I'm fine, Fish. Hiccup took a step back. Just drop it. Look, I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't care. But some of us have started having meetings. Fish legs fidgeted a bit and Hiccup felt a twinge of anger rise in his chest. Meetings. Just talking about everything that's been happen. It doesn't matter, Fish. I do what I have to do. I said drop it. Hiccup shouted, his voice echoing in the still silence of the deserted village square. Okay. Sorry for trying to be a friend. Fish legs nervously added yet abruptly turned back the way he came. Hiccup watched him go for a moment, quickly realizing that his outburst only proved his friend's point. And the rest of the villagers apparently. A short trot caught him up to Fish legs and he held a hand out to stop his friend. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have shouted. You're right, I am more irritable. But I can't. I don't want to talk about it. Fish legs nodded. We know you don't and I'm not asking for details. It's your business, your family. And I don't want to lecture you, but you're the chief. Everything you say and do directly affects all of us. And the last few months have been concerning. Hiccup grunted in response, almost refusing to comment. He kicked a loose pebble out of the dirt and balanced on the edge of his prosthetic expertly. Sensing he was not getting anywhere, Fish legs sighed. Hiccup looked up at him through his bangs. Was it just his imagination or did Fish sound tired? And it wasn't because of the hour. Just let us know, okay? We're your friends, and if you don't want to tell everyone then talk to me. Or Gobber. We've been your confidants before and you know we won't blab if you don't want us to. So says the guy who informs me that there are secret meetings of which I am the topic. Hiccup replied sarcastically. Fish legs winced, but quickly added, you know what I mean. Don't think your sarcasm fools everyone. I want to help. I know, fish. I know. Hiccup sighed tiredly. I will. Just not yet. Fish Legs gently patted his shoulder and smiled warmly. Get some sleep, Chief. The burly man walked back up the street, his boots crunching in the dirt. Night, Fish. Hiccup gently called after him. He stood silently in the torchlight before turning back to the hill leading to the bridge and by extension, his home. In all honesty, he didn't want to go back. He was no longer tired, conflicting emotions from his family and now his friends swarmed his mind. Maybe he could just make a mug of tea and sit outside, watch the stars. Oftentimes as a teenager he would open the ceiling door and watch the heavens rotate while the hours passed and sleep would evade him. Perhaps he would do that again from the porch. Hopefully Toothless would be awake soon and he could get an early morning flight in before the day's stresses began. Correction, they already began. He wasn't outside for nothing after all. His house loomed in the distance, a soft glow of candlelight winking at him from the kitchen window. Apparently Astrid hadn't blown it out when she went back upstairs. How thoughtful of her. That was a change. Hiccup sat on his front steps, huffing at the angry thoughts still churning. His people were holding meetings about him. What kind of meetings? Was it even legal to hold meetings about the chief against his knowledge? His eyebrows took a jump when the thought occurred to him, mutineers did that. He scoffed lightly. He wasn't that bad of a chief. Surely they weren't planning to get rid of him already. They had to understand that 2 children and a wife who was becoming increasingly snippy would cause anyone to be irritable. Things would get better one day. The nightmares would go away and Astrid would come around. He was just having a low point in life, nothing else. But he did recognize one key point that he was thankful Fish Legs had mentioned: his actions and attitudes directly affected the village. And if what Fish Legs said was true, the results were apparently not so good. Astrid smiled sweetly at the heat of the sun basking on her face. She listened happily as Adriana quietly sounded out her word list. 20 minutes of reading in front of Gobber's Forge was proving to be a successful lesson so far. She hoped bringing Adriana to the village for a session would be profitable due to the people milling about. Originally she assumed it would be very distracting, but Adriana seemed to focus better with some background noise. It was strange, but if she was reading, Thor strike her down if she complained. Astrid glanced at her daughter, biting her tongue to keep from blurting out the word. And Adriana grinned. I did it. Astrid nodded. Now let's try these. She replaced the 3-letter word list with a 4-letter word list. Adriana's smile immediately disappeared. What? I did my reading. You said I could play when I was done. Adriana said, scowling at the 3 sheets of paper that had been placed in front of her. You can when you're finished reading these words. Astrid commanded. You didn't say I was going to have to read more. Adriana whined. You wouldn't have agreed if I told you. Astrid replied in an almost nonchalant tone. Sound it out, An. You lied to me. Astrid rolled her eyes. I omitted the truth. There's a difference. Daddy says to never lie. Adriana fixed her bright green gaze on her mother. Well, your precious daddy isn't here. Astrid said through gritted teeth. This isn't daddy time, okay? You are with me, and so help me Thor, you will sit here until you read these pages. Adriana nearly screeched in response, tugging at her hair. A few people stopped to look at the pair of blondes. Astrid faked a smile but seethed at her daughter. Stop acting like this and try again. No. Don't you tell me no, I said sound it out. For God's sake, Anna, you're 7 years old, you need to learn to read. Astrid pointed to the word on the paper, balling her other hand into a fist so tightly her fingernails were cutting into her palm. What is wrong with you? Why won't you listen to me? Why would I want to? You're so mean. Adriana snapped, pushing the paper away. I am the only one who cares about making sure you have an education. Astrid pushed the paper back in front of her daughter. Care? You don't care. You just want to yell at me, that's all you ever do. Adriana shouted, her face turning red. You think I like this? You think I enjoy having a daughter who is years behind her peers in reading? You are sadly mistaken. Astrid said through gritted teeth. Then stop. I'm not going to let you embarrass this family. Astrid gripped Adriana's shoulder, causing the girl to squirm. What do you think it's going to look like to everyone else if you can't read? People are going to think you're stupid, is that what you want? Daddy doesn't care if I can read or not. Adriana mumbled into her lap. Well, your daddy isn't here right now. I am your mother, you are supposed to listen to me. Adriana stood up. No. Don't you talk back to me, young lady. Astrid seethed, grabbing her daughter's wrist. Adriana gave her mother a very false smile. Oh, I'm sorry, you want me to stop responding? Fine, I'll stop. Both blonde haddocks failed to notice that most villagers, a group that included Gobber, Eric, and Heather, had stopped to stare at the ensuing argument. Sit back down. Astrid breathed in her daughter's face, determined not to make a scene. Adriana stared back in defiance. No. Stop being a brat and sit back down. Astrid grabbed the girl's shoulders and tried to force her back in the chair. Ow, let go of me. Adriana shrieked. I said sit down. Astrid pushed her daughter's shoulders down, but the girl remained upright. Adriana defiantly remained on her feet and looked her mother directly in the eye. No wonder Daddy can't stand you. Smack. The force of Astrid's hand across Adriana's face caused the girl to stumble backward. The mother heard a collective gasp from the villagers standing nearby. Heather nearly screamed at what she had just witnessed. Gobber dropped the bucket he was carrying, his mouth wide open in shock. In fact, as Astrid looked out over the crowd of horrified Vikings who had just witnessed this incident, there seemed to be a lot of open mouths. A lot of wide eyes. The looks on their faces ripped through her. She had slapped her child. What's more, she had slapped the girl out in the open. She couldn't even fathom why she had done it. It seemed that for a moment, for less than a second, she had completely lost control. By the time she looked back to where her daughter was standing, her gaze met thin air. She turned around just in time to see the little girl running at a breakneck speed toward the Great Hall. Anna. Anna, wait. Astrid called, running after her but stopping when she realized that her daughter had too much of a head start. It took a few seconds for the young mother to realize exactly why her daughter had made a beeline to the hall instead of home. Hiccup was holding a meeting there about some sort of harvesting thing. She hadn't been listening when he told her. It was too late to stop her daughter from telling her husband what had happened, what she had done. She felt a burning sensation behind her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling with dread. This wasn't going to end well for anyone. Suddenly, she became acutely aware of the silence of the village square. She whipped her head around to face her fellow hooligans, many of whom were still in shock. Eric, on the other hand, was glaring at her with a sort of righteous anger. She was suddenly overcome with the desire to slap him as well, but, besides the fact that his mother was 2 feet away from him, she really didn't have a solid reason to other than that this 8-year-old boy had the audacity to criticize her parenting. What are you looking at? Astrid snapped at the crowd. Instantly, almost like nothing had happened at all, everyone went back to what they were doing, apparently not bold enough to confront her for what she had done. Eric still looked furious, but he refrained from commenting as he walked away with his mother. This was it. Astrid looked over at the Great Hall, which now contained her husband and daughter. Any second now, she would be confronted by a livid Hiccup. She took a few shaky steps in the direction of her house. If she was going to have an argument with her husband, she wanted as few people to hear it as possible. The farming members of the council were a funny bunch. They were the sort of people who didn't mind getting dirt under their fingernails or wear shirts with holes in them. The sort of people who didn't care if they smelled like dragon dung or the copious amounts of sweat that would coat their bodies as they worked. Hiccup enjoyed farming meetings. He wasn't a stickler for traditions, and there was sort of an unwritten rule that farmers were exempt from ordinary Viking attire and, at times, attitudes. The meeting was coming to a close when he heard the large double doors of the hall creak as they opened to admit a tiny girl. He smiled. Adriana often liked to come in toward the end of his meetings so that he could have a bit of extra time with her between duties as chief. These little moments with her were precious to him. He turned back to the group of farmers to wrap up the meeting, but a sound caught his attention and distracted him completely. There was a sniffle, and then a hiccup. As you know, harvest time is limited, so you need to make sure. Hiccup peered at his daughter and his heart stopped beating for just a second. Her little hand was covering an angry red mark on the left side of her face. She was crying as silently as she could, but there was no masking the high-pitched hiccups that sporadically emanated from her throat. Feeling propelled by paternal instincts, Hiccup made a beeline to his little girl, his sentence unfinished and forgotten. The moment he reached her, he got down on his knees so that he could be face to face with his child. "Addie, who hit you?" He gently moved her hand away from her cheek and was dismayed to notice that the mark was quite a bit bigger than he had initially thought. Adriana shook her head, tears running down her face and dripping onto the front of her shirt. Hiccup put his hands on her upper arms and squeezed them in what he hoped was a reassuring way. In truth, he was shaking with fury. The size of the mark indicated that it certainly wasn't a child who had inflicted it. An adult had hit his daughter. Whoever it was, he already wanted to strangle them. "Addie, come on, sweetie. Tell me who hit you." His voice was trembling with the effort to keep it calm and soothing. Adriana sniffled and stared at her shoes. "Mommy." "What?" Hiccup bellowed, making everyone in the room, including Adriana, jump in shock. The hall was spinning. Astrid had slapped his little girl. Her little girl. A bubble of rage, the likes of which he felt so rarely he almost forgot it was possible, burst within his chest. "All right," he muttered to himself, his face burning and probably turning red. "That's it." He took his daughter by the hand, stood up, and faced the farmers. "Meeting adjourned," he said in a voice devoid of emotion. As he walked out of the great hall, his hand gripping his daughter's, he looked over in the direction of his house. He didn't want to face his wife, but he knew he must for his little girl's sake. But she didn't have to hear the confrontation. "I'm taking you to Gobus," he told her. "Why?" Adriana asked. "Did I do something wrong?" "No. But your mommy and I need to have a talk." He took a deep breath. "A very important talk." Chapter 4, Storm. Chapter text. Hiccup marched up to his old mentor, still gripping Adriana's hand in his. He didn't notice as most of his people stepped far away from him when he came close. He didn't see the fearful looks or the cautious glances. "Gobber." Hiccup stopped beside the older man abruptly, also failing to notice the dust swirling around their ankles. Gobber turned with an eyebrow raised. "Watch Addie for me." Hiccup. "I'll be back. Would ya shut up and listen to me for a moment?" Gobber interrupted, making Hiccup huff. He didn't want to listen to anyone aside from Astrid. "Don't be too hard on her." Hiccup blinked, sure he heard wrong. Gobber blinked back, looked quite serious. Hiccup chuckled humorlessly. "You're serious?" The smile was replaced by a small amount of the anger rolling within him. "You want me to just let this go?" "I am not condoning what Astrid did," but Gobber looked down at Adriana and shortly continued, "I will say this whether she hears me or not, Anna was not acting proper. Not at all. So that's a proper excuse to be slapped. Well, when your 7-year-old daughter makes snide comments about her parents' marriage, I think it's understandable. Anna has no place to say anything about such things." Gobber sighed, looking back up at Hiccup. Astrid lost control for but a moment. Hiccup. "But if you're going to yell at her, your daughter deserves a lecture as well. Seems you've already covered that." Hiccup snipped. "Would you like to lecture Astrid for me too? You weren't planning on even talking to your daughter." Hiccup. "I am not so blind as to not notice the favoritism you constantly display. If you won't teach Anna to stop acting like a brat around your wife, then do not get bent out or shape when others step in." Hiccup's arms shook with fury and people didn't fail to notice the shade of red his face had acquired. They backed away, but Gobbert stood firm. Countless years of being close friends with the Haddocks gave him near immunity to their outraged anger. Hiccup's lips finally parted. "Don't make me ask someone else to watch Addie. If I didn't want to protect her from this oncoming explosion, I wouldn't accept." Gobber seethed back. Then he lowered his voice so only Hiccup heard him. Both of you are doing this to yourselves. It's not our fault, not your kid's fault. Take her or move. Gobber swallowed and stuck his hand out to Adriana. She continued to stare up at Hiccup with wide, fearful eyes. Gobber noticed her fingers were turning a dark shade of red due to Hiccup squeezing her hand so hard. In his anger he didn't even notice, and, always selfless when her father was concerned, the girl didn't complain. The small blonde steadily let go of her father's hand, gently massaging her fingers before holding Gobber's hand. Hiccup turned on his heel and stalked toward the bridge leading home. I will be back at dusk. Gobber and Adriana watched him go while everyone else avoided any contact with their temperamental chief. The older folk remembered Stoic's anger issues but never was Stoic this angry this often. It was very disconcerting, to say the least. Gobber stepped forward into the square when he was sure Hiccup was out of earshot. All of you to your homes. This confrontation ain't gonna be good and I have a feeling we are all going to end up hearing it if we stay outdoors. Adriana looked up at him with wide eyes. People scurried to their homes without further question. Gobber sighed heavily and pulled Adriana toward his home. Come on, little lady. Let's get a cold cloth on that cheek. Toothless knew something was up. His rider hadn't been as aloof with him as he had been with his wife and son, but there was still a sort of disconnect between them that wasn't there mere months earlier. The Night Fury had suspected that something was wrong ever since his human had killed the one who threatened to rip apart his family. A sort of darkness in his eyes that none but he could see. And perhaps the girl. That may have been why his rider and the female young were nearly inseparable ever since. But over the last month or so, since just after the twins' 7th birthday, Toothless human had taken a turn for the worse. He had a tendency to lash out at people, his wife included. Toothless wasn't as familiar with the female human with whom his own human was so enamored, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Pain she masked by lashing back at him. He and Stormfly began to feel like they were on opposite sides of a fierce war brewing within their rider's house. And the young were the innocents thrown into the mix by no fault of their own. Wishing they could speak the human language of which they knew so little, he and Stormfly did their best to remind their humans of their vows taken just under 8 years ago. Not having young of his own, Toothless had, in some ways, learned how to be a father alongside his human. He still hadn't forgotten the day the young had escaped their playpen and the female had wandered into a forgotten net trap. She had been perfectly fine, of course, as had the male, who, for some reason, returned to the house completely devoid of his removable skin, but it was enough to make him protective of the little humans. Like Dragon Young, they were innocent and needed to be shielded from some of the worst things life had to offer. But dragons have a sixth sense about oncoming storms and, though the evening was a clear one, Toothless knew a storm was brewing. His human had emerged from the great hall, his hand gripping the female youngs and trembling in rage. With a soft coo, Toothless followed his human into the square where there had been a verbal confrontation of some sort. He cursed his inability to completely decipher what humans were saying in that confusing language. The large man missing 2 limbs had taken the female young and now his human was stomping toward the house. He ran alongside the enraged human, attempting to nudge him with his head in a reassuring way. His rider completely ignored him. His green eyes were flashing, almost glowing in the light of the slowly setting sun. Toothless had seen him angry before but never like this. When they finally arrived at the Haddock house, Toothless trotted in front of his human and blocked his path. Move. Hiccup said, putting out a hand and attempting to shove the dragon to the side. Toothless narrowed his eyes at the human. He wasn't going to let him past until he had calmed down a bit. The human seethed. I said move. I don't have time to go flying, but... Hiccup tried to move past his dragon but the Night Fury stood firm. What? What do you want? Toothless snorted and blinked a few times. I'm not going to calm down. Astrid hit my daughter. The dragon narrowed his eyes at the human. Look, it doesn't matter if Addie said something she shouldn't have said. Astrid went way over the line. Toothless sighed deeply. Sometimes his human could be as stubborn as a mule. Not that it wasn't a trait they shared, in fact it was one of the things that brought them closer over the years, but when they were on the opposite side, it could be a bit of a clash of wills. Toothless was determined to make sure his human didn't do anything he would regret. If I have to fight you to get into my house, I will. I said move, Toothless. That's an order. Hiccup growled, meeting his dragon's fierce gaze. Toothless defiantly sat down in front of the door. He continued to glare at the human, trying so very hard to convey exactly what he wanted to say. Which was basically to stop being such an idiot and to calm down. But, as usual, the human seemed determined to make a fool of himself. Fine. Hiccup shouted after several attempts to push past his dragon. Fine. I'll calm down. If that's what you want. Toothless cooed contentedly and took a deep breath, hoping his human would take the lead. He did. After several deep breaths, his rider looked almost happy. Satisfied that he had done his job, Toothless stepped away from the front door to allow his human access. He thought a nap in the pen was probably a good idea. He and Stormfly needed to stick together as much as possible. What Toothless hadn't considered was that Hiccup had been pretending to be calm for quite a long time. After enough practice, he could fake it with ease. Smirking triumphantly at his dragon, he stepped forward and pushed open the door. Astrid sat on the couch, her head in her hands and her heart pounding in her ears. She heard the door creak open. She was expecting a shout but was met with silence. It was completely unnerving. There were sounds coming from the doorway, indicating that her husband was hanging up his vest or doing something else to delay the inevitable blow-up. After a few seconds, it appeared that he couldn't distract himself with any pointless task any longer. She heard the clunk of his prosthetic hit the ground several times and could feel him looming over her. Addie says you hit her. She couldn't move. Her head felt too heavy to rise from her shoulders and out of her hands. Did you not hear me? Hiccup's voice, though quiet, was rather dangerous. I heard you, she muttered into her hands. So did you. Why was he asking this? Didn't he believe the testimony of the only member of his family he didn't despise? There was a pause and Astrid realized that he expected an answer. Yes. She glanced upward and watched her husband walk to the other side of the room, his hands in his hair. What, why would you do that? He nearly implored, his breath steepening as though he was willing himself not to run over and strangle her right then and there. It was a mistake, she said tersely through pursed lips. Yeah. It was. Hiccup replied, turning his face away even more. I shouldn't have, but she's such a brat sometimes. The excuses were pathetic but she had nothing else to offer. So you think it's okay to just hit her? Hiccup leaned against the kitchen table, gripping it with both of his hands. We punish her all the time. Yes. Hiccup shouted, whipping his head around at last and glaring at her. And we tell her why. We don't just go hitting her whenever we feel like it. It was instinctual, Hiccup, you didn't hear what she said. Astrid's voice rose in volume as a glimmer of anger began to rise within her. I didn't go in with the intention of hitting her. You hit our daughter. Does that mean nothing to you? I'm sorry. Astrid stood up and faced her husband. I tried to apologize but she just ran to you. It's what she always does. How can I even begin to build a relationship with my daughter if she won't even let me apologize? Why would she want to? Hiccup snapped, his knuckles turning white as he continued to grip the table. You rag on her daily and then you slap her. I was just trying to step up and teach her to read. Astrid took a step closer to her husband, who flinched. By yelling at her. By forcing her to sit in front of your word lists until she sounds every single word out. Hiccup turned away, apparently unable to look at her any longer. I talked to her on the way to Gobbus. She says you grabbed her and when she wouldn't sit down, you slapped her. She was talking back. Yelling at me. Astrid shouted, now balling her fists. No, it's more than that. Hiccup bellowed, his hands letting go of the table and propelling him forward so he stood up straight. You are obsessed with making sure everyone is as perfect as you are. Well, guess what, Astrid? She isn't like you. If you want a perfect child, stick with Finn. I know she's not like me, Hiccup. If she was, she'd have toughened up by now. Astrid threw her hands up in disgust. What's that supposed to mean? Hiccup leaned in so that they were uncomfortably close. Oh, figure it out. Hiccup huffed in her face. So you're saying she's weak and small and useless, just like I was then? Is that it? Sorry if I don't just throw a weapon in her hands every time she is hurting from being abused. I'm sorry if I love my daughter more than that. The suck it up and deal with it mindset will not work on Addie. It won't. The sooner you learn that the better. It worked just fine on Finn. Hiccup slapped her hand to his forehead. Oh yeah, because they're exactly the same person. Silly me for forgetting that. Astrid gritted her teeth, tightening her fingers between the spikes of her armored skirt. Don't you talk to me like that. I am your wife, a little respect would suffice. Hiccup snickered arrogantly. Because you are so respectful. This isn't about me. You hit our daughter. Apparently it is all about you. You can't have your way with her, so you resort to abuse. It is not all about me, and I do not. If you want to talk abuse, let's talk emotional abuse. If she had set the boars through the village, you would have hardly batted an eye. But Finn did it and you nearly strangled him for it. He's the next chief. He's only 7. So is Addie. She is old enough that she doesn't need your incessant babying anymore. You treat her like she can do no wrong just because she was missing for a couple of days and... Hiccup's heart nearly stopped and he took a step back. Missing for a couple of... He stopped, nearly choking on the words. No. I'm not, no. He held up a hand and smiled sweetly at her like she was a child. Maybe you hit your head sometime recently and have forgotten, let me refresh your memory. She was taken by a madwoman who left threatening notes, who beat her, who almost killed her. Hiccup waved a few fingers in her face. Ringing any bells? Astrid flicked his hand away, face pink in anger from being treated so flippantly. Addie was 3 years old. I hate that it happened, but it did, and now it's time to move on. Don't you call her that. Hiccup sneered. Astrid tossed her head both in irritation and to clear her vision of her bangs. Oh really? Why not? She's my daughter too. I'll call her whatever I want. Just so you can slap her all you want to, apparently. Sick of him bringing up her error that she was truly sorry for, Astrid raised a hand to slap him. Hiccup saw the action coming long before she moved, almost waiting patiently for it. He grabbed her wrist, fingers tight against her flesh. Her fingers began to turn red. Don't you dare, he hissed through his teeth. We are not 16 anymore. Then stop acting like it. Astrid hissed in his face before yanking against his grip. It was hard enough to bruise. And he called her abusive. Let go. Hiccup pulled her only closer, his face still red in anger. Being so close to him when this angry made her nervous. She pushed against his shoulder with her free hand. Hiccup's breath made her bangs flutter against her eyebrow. You want me to let you go? Swear to me that you will not slap my daughter again. I don't care if you birthed her or how hard you work with her, she is mine too, and you are not to treat her like that again, do you understand me? Or do I need to spell it out? Astrid squeezed the socket joint in his shoulder hard enough to make him wince. I won't. Hiccup released her wrist in a jerking fashion. Fine. He took a few steps back to the door and reached for his coat. Astrid stared at his back, watching him get ready to leave so easily. That's it? She asked with a deep frown. But he was too angry to see the hurt in her eyes. Hiccup spun around with a very fake smile. Oh, I'm sorry baby. He cupped her face in his hands and quickly pecked her forehead. Better. He was surprised when Astrid's face twisted in distress and tears welled up in her eyes. What surprised him even more was the very fact that, in all honesty, he didn't feel even the slightest twinge of guilt. Astrid gently shook her head and looked away, lightly sniffing. I don't know what happened to you, Hiccup. But you are not the man I married. Hiccup shrugged nonchalantly. You're right. I'm not. He moved past her toward the door again, but without warning she latched onto his arm, refusing to let him go with her grip and gaze. Suddenly she wanted affection. She wanted to know everything. She couldn't have asked questions 2 years ago. The thoughts only made him angrier and he tried to pull away. But Astrid held fast, almost pleading in her gaze. Why? Just talk to me, please. At last Hiccup extricated himself from her grip. Talk. Where were you 2 years ago? You don't want to talk. You just want to tell me where I screw up and don't measure up to your endless perfection. At Astrid's furrowed brow, he continued, I married you because I thought you were perfect. Well, little did I know how insanely, ridiculously perfect everything has to be. Hiccup exhaled the last few words, suddenly feeling tired. He was tired of the pain, he was tired of the anger. But most of all he was tired of not being heard by the people who should care. People don't see the current issues, and years later when things suddenly fall apart, that's when they want you to relive your past and indulge in all your deep, dark secrets. It was infuriating. Astrid huffed, this isn't about me. Why aren't you the same person? What happened? Just tell me. I'm a murderer. Hiccup thundered. Astrid blinked and took a step back. What? Hiccup, a murderer? Hiccup continued in his rant, her unsure expression unseen. That's what has changed. The innocent Hiccup you married is dead, all right. I walked away from that duel, and not with just a few blasted scars. I am not the same, and I am sorry that I can't still be myself. Astrid stared at him in shock. Now she understood what he meant by murderer. To any other person in the world, murderer would be the last term to explain that situation. But to Hiccup, that is exactly what it was. Hiccup was nearly panting, the angry expression melting off his face to be replaced by the terror he felt almost every night. That expression only tuned Astrid back to his rant. You will never understand what it feels like to be a killer because you aren't like me. You could kill somebody, necessary or not, and move on, but I couldn't kill a dragon as a teenager when that is what I dreamed about doing every day since I was a kid. How could I kill a human and not be impacted by it? Hiccup slumped against the door, still staring at her with near anguish. Astrid felt the need to hug him. That is probably what she should have done. But she only stood and stared. Hiccup felt the need to continue. Maybe she wasn't getting it. I'm not a killer like you. And neither is Addy. This is why we both differ from you and Finn, we aren't warriors or conquerors. That isn't me and that isn't her. Something clicked in Astrid's mind at those words. She shook her head, eyes closed, mouth open yet silent. The action made him stop before he spoke his next thought. Hiccup. She opened her eyes again, still gently shaking her head. No, you're right that she is not a killer. But she isn't you. Hiccup furrowed his brow. What's that supposed to mean? Astrid took a step away as if this new revelation knocked the wind out of her. She placed a hand on her forehead. It all makes sense now. Gods, I'm an idiot. What? Astrid fixed a glare on him and pointed her finger at his chest. You're the problem. Suddenly the passion was back in her voice, and with it, her annoyance. You and your self-hatred and insecurities and lashing out at everyone who just wants to help. Astrid waved a hand toward the village when she spoke of them. Then she lightly shrugged, except precious Addy, of course, because she is exactly you before you killed Dager. You're projecting everything you ever think you were onto her. You have it stuck in your head that she is the most innocent person. She has to be so protected that nothing, literally nothing, can touch her. Not only is that unrealistic, you think that it's going to fill that crater in your soul. She isn't perfect and she can't fix you and your problems. The fire returned to Hiccup as well, his voicing rising along with his thin frame. He stood tall in front of her again. Then who am I supposed to talk to? You. He gestured to her with his eyebrows and a curt, sarcastic nod. The person who tells people to shut up and deal with their own issues, to stop being a baby. Astrid scowled. I am your wife. And by not confiding in me, by putting someone else before me, it's like you're cheating on me. Hiccup took a step back, air caught in his throat. That's disgusting, why would you, how could you even say that? Astrid pursed her lips, forcing herself to remain calm when he so clearly misunderstood that. There's more than one way to have an affair, Hiccup. And that's what you are doing. So you're basically saying I cheated on you with our 7-year-old daughter. Technically she was 5 when you started. Hiccup raised a hand to his hair just to let it fall again with a slap. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? You were giving our daughter the emotional intimacy that should have gone to us. Hiccup breathed a short laugh, shaking his head and walking back towards the kitchen table. I can't believe I'm hearing this. I can't believe I have to tell my husband, a grown man, to stop acting the way he does. That isn't my job. What are you trying to say? That we shouldn't be there for our daughter anymore? This is not about her, this is about you. You keep bringing her up. Because you put her on that pedestal. Pretend Addie isn't here for a minute, if you can, and think about you. Just you, not Addie. You. You're not making any sense. When was the last time you held me when I cried? Hiccup stopped short at her words. Aside from just a few minutes ago, it was hard to think of Astrid ever crying. Astrid curtly added, it was yesterday, by the way. Hiccup swallowed. Was he really that oblivious? Or did she just cry when he was out of the house, which was almost constantly? If that was the case, she couldn't seriously blame him for not holding her every time she was upset. Astrid continued when his silence ensued. I'm just trying to say that you need to get it in your head that not everything is about you. And you need to stop projecting all your problems onto our daughter. She's a little girl, she should not be put on a pedestal and she should not have to be the one who deals with you every time you need to talk to someone. Astrid. If you don't knock this off, I'm going to start protecting her from you until you get your act together. Hiccup opened his mouth to angrily retort but found no words. He let his mouth closed with an audible snap, just projecting his feelings to her with his eyes. Astrid met his gaze effortless, refusing to back down. Her heart ached, but she had to continue her train of thought. She couldn't hold it in any longer. I don't know what happened to you. You're a terrible husband, you're an irresponsible father. Her voice cracked yet she plowed through. She watched his expression darken into a betrayed expression. I didn't marry someone like that. And I don't want to be married to it now. Hiccup shrugged and finally looked at his shoe. He felt his pulse spike but he ignored it, speaking his mind anyway. You never want to be in the same room as me anyway, so maybe you shouldn't be. His eyes on the ground, he didn't see the hurt expression. But he sensed her cross her arms. Are we seriously talking about this? She asked tersely. Yeah. I think we are. Hiccup lifted his eyes to find hers burning just as angrily as his, though their voices were quiet. Astrid grit her teeth, her heart pounding. So, what do you want? I don't know. But it isn't this. Hiccup didn't blink or move when he spoke. Astrid, however, looked toward the door. I don't want this either. I can't, we never even touch anymore. I just can't do this anymore. Hiccup looked toward the kitchen to make her disappear from his vision. Then maybe we shouldn't keep trying. He paused, heartbeat loud in his ears. Suddenly he felt the need to leave. To run. To fly. To scream. To do anything. But he couldn't stand in this house with her another moment. He abruptly stood, prosthetic scraping on the wood floor he had polished 8 years ago with his own hands. He felt his thoughts freeze, wondering where in Asgard that memory came from. I'm going to get my daughter from Gobbers. We'll be sleeping at my dad's old house. I can't right now. He walked straight to the door, purposefully avoiding her by at least 2 feet. Astrid suddenly found herself panicking. What had she done? What if he didn't come back? Why didn't she hug him when her heart and soul longed for it? Why didn't she take the chance when she knew time was so limited? Why? Wait! Astrid reached out and desperately grabbed his arm just as his fingers twisted the handle. Wait. But Hiccup wrenched his hand away, not even bothering to look at her again. His jacket flapped loudly at the sharp jerk, then the door slammed in her face. Astrid's heart pounded and she touched the door with her palm. The silence was ringing in her ears, making her own mind spin at a rate faster than she could comprehend. Thoughts, emotions, ideas, everything rushed together. And then it clicked. She was finished. She didn't love the man Hiccup had become and she didn't want to deal with him anymore. Not now. Not ever. She wanted him gone, out of her life forever. But more than anything, she wanted the Hiccup she had married. She missed his smile. His playful smirk. His biting sarcasm. His warmth when he would hold her close, the light in his eyes after she kissed him. His determination and stubbornness that wasn't just skin deep. She wanted her Hiccup, the man she fell in love with as a teenager, who single-handedly destroyed the Red Death with Toothless at his side. The man who knew dragons on an almost spiritual level, the man who understood people's feelings and emotions even better than his own because he was so selfless, the man who rocked his children to sleep no matter the hour or the sleep deprivation he knew would result, the man who nearly died for the tribe he loved so much, for the people in his life who meant the most to him. That was the man she had married. But he was gone. And what made it even worse was the man who had replaced him. A man so selfish, so snide and arrogant, so angry. So hypocritical. So easy to despise. She hated him. She hated the man he had become. She hated him to the point of never wanting to see him again. She wanted to burn the house down, torch every living memory she had of him. Where was her Hiccup? Why did he have to die? Why did he have to turn into a man he would hate every bit as much as her? How could he not see how much pain he was causing? Hiccup. The name that had once been a comfort to her now ignited her insides with a rage she could no longer contain. A scream of rage tore through her throat as she slammed her fists against the door. The door that symbolized her husband's treatment of her. Never talking, never in the same room, rarely looking her in the eye as he used to, just door after door slammed in her face. She couldn't take it anymore. She wanted him out. She wanted out. She wanted to bid him farewell and not even consider bidding him good luck. She loathed the man he now was. She hit the door with angry screams of rage until her fingers bled and palms bruised, pretending it was the fool himself. Wishing it was him she was hurting and not herself. She hated him, and she hated herself. She hated that she couldn't convince him to be reasonable and she couldn't convince herself to endure this hard time. She never gave up on any challenge. She thrived on challenges. Yet this was not one she could win, she was losing. And giving up was, for once, the only thing she wanted to do. The irony concerned her, her marriage was the one thing she promised to even the gods that she would strive to keep together. Her vows were breaking, her husband's vows were breaking. It hurt. It hurt like she had swallowed a bowl of fireworms and they twisted, writhed in the pit of her stomach. But she couldn't change her feelings. There was no stopping those true feelings pouring into her soul. It was over. There was nothing she could do to stop it. So she wouldn't try. Tears rained on her face and she sobbed into her hands. She had failed Hiccup just as he had failed her. She had failed both her children. She had failed her friends and the village. And what hurt the most was the fact that she failed herself. As she sat, hunched over and sobbing into her hands, she didn't see the little boy on top of the staircase. The little boy whose heart was breaking, and who had made a decision that would change everything. The boy who gritted his teeth and marched back to his room, hatching a plan to end this pain once and for all. Hiccup should have felt guilty. He was crunching through the twigs and branches on the way to Gobbus, his hands in his pockets and his teeth gritting together. He was angry, most definitely, but he wasn't guilty. On some level, he knew that some of the things he had said were wrong and warranted an apology. So why didn't he feel guilty for saying them? Why was it that all he could feel was self-pity and abject fury? Well, he thought, he was right about not being the man he was before. Old Hiccup would have felt horrible for treating Astrid that way. He would have run back and begged her to forgive him. But he didn't want to. He had a surge of delight. Not the kind that made him truly happy. But there was a fierce pleasure in it. In making Astrid suffer for how she had made him feel. In finally telling her what he had been thinking for weeks, that maybe they shouldn't be married anymore. He didn't want to be married anymore. He didn't even care about how that would affect the village, not to mention his children. As long as he got out, everything would be okay. But he was supposed to feel guilty. And a part of him was angry at himself for not wanting to work things out. For letting his life crumble around him. But not one of the emotions swirling around his head and his heart was guilt. Not one of them was right. Who was he anymore? He stopped in his tracks, turning his head toward the woods. It was dusk, so the sky was darkening, but he couldn't stop the sudden urge to take a hike. He thought briefly that he did, in fact, need firewood. And now was as good time as any to cut down a tree, wasn't it? He turned on his heel and marched back to the house. He vaguely remembered that Astrid had left an axe propped against the side of the house when she wasn't using it. The kids were finally old enough to know better than to mess with it. As soon as his hand closed around its hilt, his grip became painfully tight as all the rage he had felt over the last few weeks burst through. His entire body was shaking as he walked into the woods. He could vaguely hear screaming from the house. Rather than make him feel guilty, it only made him feel that sick delight he got from the knowledge that he had hurt his wife. That fueled his anger even more. Suddenly, with no warning at all, he swung at a tree and left a good-sized dent in its bark. It was almost like his arms had moved of their own accord. The tree in question was far too big for one family's firewood. Were he thinking logically, he would have picked a smaller one. Easier to chop down, easier to carry back, easier to chop into pieces. But this tree, this gigantic, towering tree, this tree was better. This was the one he wanted. His arms swung again. The loud chopping noises sent birds scattering in all directions, their panicked tweeting and flapping wings irritating him, making him want to shoot them down. But first things first. He swung his axe again and dented the tree further. "It's not my fault," he mumbled to himself. "I didn't ask for this. All this stuff coming down on me, this responsibility, everything that has gone wrong in the last 7 years. It's not my fault." His heart was pounding, his chest constricting. Whose fault was it? As he continued to swing the blade into the tree, his mind rushed backward, trying to cling to something, anything, that would take the blame off of him. For being an irresponsible father. For almost hating his wife. It couldn't be his fault. Astrid was wrong. It wasn't him. It was that anger. At himself for killing a human being. At everyone who had ever hurt him or his children. Suddenly, the culprit, the villain, the monster who had destroyed his life popped into his head. His hands tightened more around the blade, his arms tense and shaking with fury. "Dad," he chopped the tree as hard as he could and left yet another dent. "You did this. You did this to me. You did this to all of us. Chop. If you had just taken responsibility for your mistake when you were a kid, none of this would have happened." He grunted as his axe embedded itself into the tree. He wrenched it out and swung it again. "She wouldn't have taken Addie, she wouldn't have told Dager exactly how to destroy my family, she wouldn't have made it necessary for me to kill him." He shouted in anger, his throat beginning to burn. "You brought that sick, twisted, life-ruining bitch into our lives. And you didn't even stick around to pick up the pieces. No, you're off in Valhalla watching me try to fix your mistakes. You just had to die when all of us needed you the most." The tree began to creak, its trunk making little snapping noises as it leaned. The axe dropped from Hiccup's hand, landing on the ground next to him and instantly forgotten. He made a fist and slammed it against the tree. It groaned and leaned backward even more. An enraged cry tore from his throat as he began beating his fists against it over and over, forcing it down with his own muscles. When it finally fell, his knuckles were dripping with blood. He hardly registered the pain. Crash. It was down. The mighty tree had fallen by his own hand. He was a Viking after all. All went silent as he froze, staring at the tree lying sideways on the ground. Most of its trunk was cleanly cut, but the final bit of it, the part still connected to the fallen tree by a few tiny pieces of bark, stuck up at odd angles, snapping when he had beat it down himself. It should have made him feel better. He had taken down his adversary. For once in his life, he had faced an enemy far bigger than he and had taken it down all by himself. But it didn't matter. Everything was crashing down around him, like trees falling in the woods, their crashes echoing in his head. And now his head began to ache. He raised his shaking fists to his temples and pressed down. The noise in his head was incredibly loud. He wanted it to stop, his family, his dragon, his village, the pain, why couldn't it stop for just once? His fists tore at his hair as he finally fell to his knees and let out the scream that was building inside of him. It echoed in the woods, sending still more birds flying away. Whether he had sat screaming there for minutes or hours he didn't know. By the time his voice gave out, it was dark. His throat felt like it had been ripped to pieces. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but he thought he could taste blood. As he took a few gulps of air, he heard a faint coo next to him. Toothless had followed him. Had he been there from the start? Had Hiccup's cries alerted him to his rider's distress? Did it really matter? He felt a surge of affection for his dragon and rested his head against the Night Fury's snout. Toothless lay still. He had heard the voices coming from the house like thunder, feel the emotions bursting forth like torrential rain. As predicted, the storm had come. And though all was now calm, though the storm appeared to have ended for the time being, he knew that it wasn't done yet. They had sailed into the eye of the storm, but it wouldn't be long before they were hit once more. Gobber was half asleep when he heard the familiar knock at the door. He jerked awake and hobbled to it, not particularly wanting to relinquish his almost nephew's daughter, but feeling like it might have been best to do so under the circumstances. If only to prove to her that her parents didn't hate her. Hiccup stood in the doorway, his knees covered in dirt, his eyes blank and almost dead, and dried blood on his hands. "What happened to you?" he asked, half genuinely concerned and half upset that he had come back hours late. "I want Addie," Hiccup rasped. "You're not taking her looking like that." Gobber's eyes flitted to the bloody hands. "Get yourself cleaned up before you get an infection." "I'm fine. I want my daughter." Hiccup's voice sounded like he had been sick for weeks. That wasn't a suggestion, that was a command. "You can take her home when you get yourself cleaned up. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Gobber grabbed Hiccup's arm and dragged him into the house. Hiccup didn't argue. He stumbled forward a bit but meekly waited for Gobber to heat some water and help him clean the blood off of his hands. When only the scabs remained, he bandaged them up. Gobber patted him on the shoulder. "I'll wake her up," he said in a gentle voice. Within a few minutes, a sleepy-looking Adriana, still dressed in the clothes she had worn that day, descended the staircase. Her eyes brightened when she saw her father. For a second. But as she took in his ragged appearance, her face fell. "What happened, Daddy?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. Hiccup shook his head. "I'm just tired." Adriana obviously didn't believe him, but she bit her lip and took his hand. Sensing that she would receive no honest explanation for the bandages on his knuckles, she refrained from comment. Fortunately for her, Hiccup's grip around her fingers was looser than it had been earlier that day. Yet, for some reason, she had a feeling that he was in worse shape than he had back then. Something about the slump in his shoulders, the tired eyes, the bandaged hands that she began to suspect covered self-inflicted injuries. Something was wrong. Well, something was wrong, she knew that for sure. But it was more wrong now. They took a few steps out of the forge before Hiccup spoke again. "We're sleeping at Poppy's old house." "All right," she thought, "something is definitely worse now than it was this afternoon." "Why?" I wanted to spend some time with you." "Without your mom, okay." Hiccup lied, feeling a twinge of guilt in the pit of his stomach that he quickly quashed. Adriana didn't believe him. She didn't believe a word of that excuse. It didn't explain his hands. It didn't explain his rasping voice or the dirt on his clothing. It didn't explain anything except that he was probably upset with her mother. He didn't speak again until they had walked into the front door of the deserted house. Few things had changed. There were belongings of stoics that had been given to others out of necessity. But all the sentimental things stayed in place. As to why no one had moved into this particular house, it was a bit of a mystery. No one wanted to, and they certainly couldn't bring themselves to demolish it. So it stood firm. Aside from a few travelers who needed lodging, it rarely hosted anyone for a long period of time. Hiccup came to the realization that neither he nor Adriana had any night clothes. Sleeping in their clothes from that day would have to do, because he certainly wasn't going to go back to his own house just for something so mundane. Not as comfortable, perhaps, but it certainly beat his wife's cold eyes. He shivered at the thought. "What's wrong?" Adriana asked, finally letting go of his hand and looking up at him with wide, slightly frightened eyes. Hiccup got down on his knees. His heart was pounding in his ears, his hands shaking a bit as he took hers. He wanted to tell her. To spill out every little secret he had held on to for so long. How much he hated himself, how guilty he felt, how desperately he wanted to get away from Astrid, but the words wouldn't come. Astrid's words echoed in his head. Adriana was a little girl. Too young for such a heavy burden. He would have to carry it alone. Addy, you know when grown-ups say that everything's going to be fine and you think they're lying just to make you feel better, he asked, squeezing her hands tightly in his. Adriana nodded, her eyes still fixed on him. Everything's going to be fine. Hiccup said, reaching up and brushing her bangs out of her eyes. The girl could feel tears rising to the back of her eyeballs, her heart thumping so hard she couldn't hear herself think and her lower lip trembling. Her daddy had lied to her. Granted, he had told her he was going to lie. But why would he say that to her? What wasn't he telling her? She wanted to cry. But no, crying wouldn't help. Crying would make her daddy hug her and comfort her when, really, he was the one who needed it more than she did. Just tell me what's wrong. Adriana said in a low voice, her eyes pleading with him. Hiccup shook his head. Addy, I can't keep depending on you anymore. It's my job to be there for you when you need me. But I can't keep crying on your shoulder. His voice was shaking almost like he was about to cry anyway. But you can. I don't mind. Adriana blinked a few times to push down her own tears. No. Not anymore. Hiccup averted her gaze, staring at her clasped hands instead. Adriana paused for a moment. She stared into her father's eyes, which still had a pained expression. He was hurting. Something had happened and he was not okay. And now he wasn't going to tell her what it was. Isn't there anything I can do, she asked, her voice shaking with the effort to stop her tears from bursting forth. Yes. Hiccup nodded and squeezed her hands again. You can give me a hug. Adriana didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around her father's neck and held on for dear life, like they were dangling off of a moving dragon and he was the only thing to which she could cling. In fact, it almost felt like they were suspended in midair and hurtling toward the unknown at frightening speeds. Hiccup's heart pounded as he held her close, his breathing labored and trembling. She was all he had left. His wife hated him, his son hated him, his tribe hated him, well, his dragon didn't hate him. Adriana and Toothless, the only two who truly loved him. To let them go would be to lose all purpose in life. It was a miracle, at this point, that anyone could possibly love him now, especially after everything that had happened, everything he had done. Then again, his daughter wasn't named Miracle for nothing. Blood was pouring out of what Hiccup knew would be a fatal wound. But as he watched Dager smile in triumph, he felt a surge of rage. If he was going to die, there was only one option left. He sat up and looked his adversary in the eye. Dager's eyes widened in shock. What? I'm sorry, Dager. Hiccup choked out. But I can't let you win. Dager made a move to grab the dagger sticking out of Hiccup's chest, but the hooligan quickly jerked his head and collided with the berserker's forehead. Dager shouted in pain and recoiled. Hiccup wrapped his right leg around the back of Dager's left knee, pulled back, and shoved Dager forward. The berserker's leg slipped out from under him, causing him to shout in shock. He grabbed Hiccup's arm, pulling him over the edge with him. Hiccup's stomach slammed painfully onto Toothless' scales and he let go of Dager's hand. An unearthly scream pierced the air. Hiccup was forced to watch Dager plummet into the rocks. There was a sickening crack and then all went silent as Dager lay there in a pool of his own blood. Bwam bwam bwam. Hiccup nearly fell out of bed as he abruptly became aware of his surroundings. He blinked rapidly so that his eyes would focus. What in the world? Hiccup. His heart plummeted. He knew that voice. Feeling distinctly agitated, he got up and tiptoed over to the front door. Addy is sleeping, what the hell do you think you're doing waking us up at the... Oh, shut up. Is Finn here? Astrid pushed past her husband and began to frantically search the room. No. Why would he be here? Hiccup yawned widely and wiped his eyes, but his vision seemed determined to be out of focus. Because he's missing, that's why. Astrid snapped. How do you know he didn't just get up early? Hiccup scratched the back of his head and registered with a grimace that he really needed to wash the sweat off of himself. Astrid turned to look at him, her gaze terrified and, surprisingly, not contemptuous. His window was wide open. There was a rope made out of his blankets hanging out of it. Hiccup's heart stopped. So, he was taken. No. Astrid shook her head as she finished examining the room, satisfied that their son was not on the premises. He ran away. Chapter 5, Adventure. Chapter Text. There are two things everyone needs to know about fearless Finn Haddock. First, that he never cried, crying is for girls. Second, he never thought very hard about his decisions. An idea would click in his mind and by golly, he was going act on it the second, nay, the millisecond that it entered. These traits caused him to make a decision that, perhaps, he should have thought over before acting on it. The decision in question led him to do what he called the dumbest thing he'd ever done, at least until he replaced it with something dumber when he was a teenager. Finn never responded well to being punished. He was soon to discover that consequences far outweighed short-term punishments. But no little boy is thinking about consequences of his own misdeeds when he's watching his beloved mother sobbing into her hands at the bottom of the staircase after an explosive fight with his father. His parents were breaking up. His mother was completely miserable. And all his parents had talked about was Addie this, Addie that. Did they even remember that they had a second child at all? Finn could only take so much. And at this time, his limit had finally been exceeded. It was this fight that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. The little boy pursed his lips, gritted his teeth, and decided that he wasn't going to be a haddock a second longer. No more worrying about being chief one day. No more fighting parents. No more being ignored because of a stupid, whiny little sister. No more feeling angry or upset. He was going to live on his own in the wilderness. It couldn't be that hard if bugs could do it. Bugs certainly weren't smarter than people. As he tiptoed to his room, he thought about what he would take. Clothes. His wooden dragon toys. A few pieces of parchment and some charcoal. A cool rock he'd found the other day. A blanket. He lay these items on his bed and stared at them. There had to be something else he needed, oh yes. A little sand shovel. He never knew what he would dig up. And the wilderness didn't have outhouses, so the shovel would serve a practical purpose as well. Always good to be practical. A little dagger was strapped to Finn's belt, mostly used to sharpen charcoal but occasionally to cut branches that got in his way while walking. That would be most helpful. As for food, he'd find berries or something. Within a few minutes, Finn was prepared. Throwing his items into a small satchel, which he tossed out his window, he tied his remaining blankets, and a few shirts, together and tied them to his bedpost. He tossed the end of the makeshift rope out the window and climbed down. It was dusk, so there was plenty of time to get situated. He could find a cave in which to sleep. Burn some twigs he found along the way. This would be a fun adventure. He crunched through the dead leaves and twigs and sticks, practically trembling with excitement, until he got to the ledge of a cliff. The sun was just falling below the horizon. Finn was mesmerized by the sight. He was used to sunrises, he loved them as well, but there was something hauntingly beautiful about sunsets. Lots of red hues. Red was his second favorite color after green. He sat down on the edge of the cliff to watch the sun finally descend below the end of the ocean. He didn't want to sail too far into the sea, no matter how much he wanted to explore, because he certainly didn't want to fall off the planet. But the sunset was nice anyway. Maybe he would get used to the sight when he was living on his own. He was about to stand up when he faced his first major setback. His boots were new, given to him only a week or so ago, and they were a bit too big for him. His parents insisted he'd grow into them, but he preferred his old boots because they were brown and these were black. One of the ugly black boots slipped off his foot and hurtled toward the ocean, where it landed on the rocks with a distant splashing sound. Finn's bare foot dangled for a few moments before he fully registered what had happened. He was going to have to make himself a new shoe, or... His mind immediately made up. He stood up and hopped on one foot until he got into the forest, where he used the branches to steady him. He wished his foot was as tough as a dragon's. They didn't need shoes. Why were humans so soft on the outside? This question became less of a random query and more of a complaint when his vest snagged on a thorny bush. He waved his arms around in an attempt to tear the vest out of the bush but only managed to cut his arms badly enough to bleed. He bit his lip against the pain, "Boys don't cry," and took off the torn vest, allowing it to remain in the bush while he continued to walk forward. Blood dripped from shallow cuts on his arms for a few seconds before they clotted and left some nasty-looking scabs. He thought briefly that Edgar would admire them when, no, he wouldn't be seeing Edgar again. He was what was that word for someone who lived on his own? A hermit. Something like that. His boot would be in the water under the cliff. He was nearing it when his eyes met a sight that completely distracted him. A boat. No, more than just a boat but a little less than a ship. Or were they the same thing? His Poppy told him the difference once. Or maybe that there wasn't one. Did it really matter? It was a shipboat he had seen before. A few times in fact. Several times a year. He furrowed his brows in intense concentration for a few seconds before the answer dawned on him. Trader Johann. That was it. Yet another completely brilliant idea entered Finn's brain and immediately required action. He didn't have to live alone in the wilderness. He could just move to a new island entirely. All he had to do was stow away in Trader Johann's boat ship and he would be on his way in the morning. At the moment, it looked deserted, so now was the best time to act. Forgetting about his boot, he hopped over to the shipboat and immediately descended into its depths. The twinkle of metals caught his eye first. It was very dark down there, but there appeared to be a collection of furs in the far corner behind what felt like a wall of various kinds of swords. Finn nearly cut his fingers inspecting them. But the furs didn't appear to be hiding anything sharp. They were soft, very soft. So soft, in fact, that they would be a wonderful place to sleep. Well, Finn thought, this adventure was becoming more exciting by the minute. Trader Johann was many things: a traveler, a storyteller, a merchant, a rather good juggler. He was proud of his accomplishments and rather liked showing them off. But one of the things he certainly wasn't was a good navigator. It was that unfortunate trait, or lack thereof, that led him to Berk instead of Rune. The ruthless Runians would surely wonder where he was, but he liked Berk. He liked the pleasant demeanor of most of its residents, the Haddock family who seemed to improve with each generation, and, most of all, the amount of enthusiasm for the goods he was selling and trading. Yes, his best merchandise came from Berk. However, the moment he docked, he was approached by several Berkians that told him that he, under no circumstances, was to stay there. Something about the Haddocks and fighting. The panicked voices nearly indicated that the Haddocks had started a war. Not wanting to walk in on a battle, the trader returned to his ship. He thought about his next stop. Rune was a day and night's travel, or 2 days if he decided to sleep. He knew how to get to Rune from Berk since he had made that journey a few times more than he had made the journey from Braun to Rune, which was how he had gotten lost in the first place. As he saw it, he had 2 options: sleep on Berk and shove off in the early morning, or sail until he got tired and then take a nap before continuing. Rune was expecting him that afternoon. He supposed he might as well get going as soon as he could. So, after getting a quick meal with a few of the Berkians, who filled him in on the real conflict, though he simply couldn't believe that Hiccup and Astrid, of all people, were at each other's throats, he returned to his ship and shoved off. He took a deep breath as Berk grew more and more distant on the darkening horizon. It really was a nice place. Hiccup and Astrid would resolve their differences in no time. And then he would get his best merchandise once more. What he didn't know was that the most valuable merchandise he had ever acquired on Berk was asleep in the belly of his ship. And that, with each mile he sailed, he was taking the boy on an adventure that neither of them would ever forget. "This is your fault." Astrid snipped as Hiccup concluded his impromptu meeting in the Great Hall. "My fault. Addy never would have done anything this dumb." Hiccup rolled his eyes as the hooligan volunteers shuffled out of the hall to search for the boy. "Looks like your suck it up and deal with it mindset wasn't so great for my son after all." "Oh, so now he's your son?" Astrid huffed, placing her hands on her hips and giving her husband a penetrating gaze. "I'm the only one who has been putting any effort into raising him over the last 2 years. Yeah, and look how well that went." Hiccup threw his arms up in irritation. Since your methods led to this, he's my son now. Soon as we get him back, I'm going to protect him from you and your idiotic ideas that pretending he doesn't have any feelings whatsoever is somehow going to toughen him up. You did not just, no. Astrid put a hand up to her forehead and winced, hoping he would take the hint and leave her alone. Hiccup opened his mouth to retort but was cut off by Snotlout and Fishlegs, who stepped between the irate couple. And you're not going to search for him together? Fishlegs said in a surprisingly firm voice. Yeah, you'll only slow us down. Hiccup, you're with me. I need to talk to you. Snotlout grabbed the man's shirt and came close to dragging him out of the hall. You're with me, Astrid. Rough and Tough can take care of themselves. Fishlegs waited for the stragglers to walk out of the hall before continuing. What's going on? Really? Fish, I know I've confided in you in the past and I'm not sorry I did that. Astrid said, wincing as her headache worsened. But right now, I want to find my son. Fishlegs opened his mouth to protest but then shut it. If it was Gunnar or Bosley missing, he'd be just as stressed as she. He nodded once. Understood. Hiccup and Snotlout were very silent as they walked through the woods in search of Berkshire. So silent that even the sounds of twigs snapping and leaves crunching beneath their boots seemed muted. Hiccup's mind was whizzing with darker thoughts by the second. His son was missing because his wife had put some of the most ridiculous ideas into his head. His daughter was stuck with Gobber because she was too young to come on a search like this. His wife was an idiot. Life could definitely be a lot better. However, as with all facets of life, it could be a lot worse. And Snotlout wasn't shy about bringing forth bad news. After a few minutes of absolute silence, the Jorgensen stopped walking. What are you doing? Hiccup growled, slowing his pace but not stopping. We need to talk. Now. Hiccup rolled his eyes but stopped walking. Yes now. Before things get more out of hand. Snotlout crossed his arms. Well, spit it out. We don't have time for. First of all, you can stop talking to me like I'm one of your kids. Take yourself down a few pegs because you might be my chief, but we are equal. Back off. Hiccup blinked. He wasn't used to being talked to in this manner by anyone other than his wife. Snotlout wasn't finished. Second, I don't know what the hell is going on with you and Astrid these days, but it needs to stop. Believe me, it will. Hiccup turned to continue but Snotlout stood firm. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. Figure it out. Hiccup took a few steps deeper into the woods. Snotlout jogged up to his chief and stepped in front of him. Oh no, I don't think so. You can't honestly. He looked around and lowered his voice just in case anyone was listening. You can't honestly think that divorce is going to fix this. So sticking with this miserable excuse for a marriage is the better option. Hiccup hissed. I don't know, maybe if you got off your high horse and started being a real father and husband, things would be so miserable now, would they? Snotlout snapped, raising his voice a tiny bit. Back off, Snotlout. Hiccup shouted. You don't know what I went through and you are in no place to judge me. Too right. I'm not. That is the issue. I shouldn't have to. Snotlout growled back. Then he sighed and shook his head, concern taking over his features. What happened at Brawn? It tore you up and we don't blame you. But taking it out in your wife and kids, and then your village, it's just too much. Hiccup opened his mouth to respond but Snotlout continued. I vowed to protect you. I vowed to stand by you. I've been willing since what happened at Brawn to stand by my chief and help him when he needs help because that is my job. Snotlout sadly shook his head. But this. I can't. I can't follow this. I can't stand by this. I can't support someone who is only tearing himself apart on the inside and is taking everyone around down with him. I can't do it. I won't do it, Hiccup. So why are you here? I wasn't talking about Finn. I am saying that if you don't get your act together, I am no longer supporting you as my chief. And don't be so naive as to think I'm the only one. Hiccup swallowed. So they were thinking about removing him, they were seriously considering it. But even then, he didn't find it in himself to care. Not one bit. He stared into Snotlout's eyes for a few silent moments. Then he shrugged. You have the choice to stand by me or not. If you don't want to support me, fine. I don't need your help anyway. But when it comes to my choices with my own family, I certainly do not need your advice. If you were anyone but my chief, I wouldn't bother saying a thing. But you are. You are tearing this village to shreds, destroying your heritage, and you don't even care. Hiccup, you don't care. Snotlout paused for a moment, his eyes widening slightly, almost as if something new, something different had entered his mind. He sighed and lowered his voice. And that, in all honesty, scares me. I fear for you, I fear for your kids, for Astrid, who has been a good friend to me since we were toddlers. I fear for my family and friends, how we'll be impacted by this. And then there's our village when we have to remove you from your position. Who is going to take over? What about when the other tribes hear about this? Have you even considered anything beyond your own selfish desires? Hiccup smirked. You would be chief. Don't deny the fact that you have always wanted to be chief. Snotlout shook his head. His eyes were full of sincerity as he reached up and poked Hiccup's chest. That's where you're wrong. Once I recognized my true leader, I saw who I wanted to take orders from. I respected my father, but it was hard to take orders from him. But you. I would go to battle for you. Do you know how many people would be willing to sacrifice for you, and you're literally spitting us in the face for it? Hiccup stared back at him blankly. Are you done? No, I'm not. Snotlout snarled, the ferocity back in his voice. I want to know what happened to the man who bravely saved this village from destruction from the Red Death, who kept his head on straight when his own daughter was kidnapped. Kept my head on straight. Are you insane, or did you not see me the night I went to pick up Finn? Hiccup laughed humorlessly. I didn't hold it together, I was a wreck the entire time, and if you think that somehow makes me a better man. Anyone would have reacted that way. And when I shut down completely when we got her back. 3 days, Hiccup. You kept yourself together for 3 days. You didn't eat, you didn't sleep, you didn't stop moving or looking. Snotlout pointed toward the village. How many parents in this village would honestly, truthfully say that they could do better? The Hiccup who did all that for his child would be willing to do whatever it takes to make up with his wife and get his act together. He growled angrily at the blank look on his chief's face. What happened to that Hiccup? Hiccup stepped away, and Snotlout could have sworn he saw a flash in his eyes, almost panicked. He quickly quashed it and fixed a blank expression on his face once more. That Hiccup is dead. Only if you choose him to be. You're choosing all of this for yourself, and you are choosing it for your family and village. Snotlout balled his fists and took a few deep breaths, trying to calm himself before he punched the man in the face. This little disagreement between you and Astrid is nothing but a minor spat. A spat. Hiccup laughed out loud at this. The dissolution of my marriage is a spat. Compared to what you and your family have gone through and seen, yes Hiccup, it is. Snotlout internally pleaded with Hiccup to see his logic. When Hiccup's expression remained unchanged, he continued. When it gets right down to it, you're just too busy feeling sorry for yourself to put any effort into making it better. You're wrong. Am I? I'm married. I have 3 kids. And I wouldn't give up over something this trivial. Trivial. Hiccup choked and stepped away, shaking his head. You don't get it. You're no different than Astrid, you will never understand. On top of that, my daughter is the same age yours was when all that happened, and I know I wouldn't be able to hold it together. You know who would be holding it together and making sure she was actually found in time? Old Hiccup. What? Yeah, you. The old you. You'd be telling us to get up, to stop panicking and think, encouraging us every step of the way and working tirelessly to make sure she came home safe. Snotlout shook his head, his tone now almost depressed. I know the old Hiccup is in there somewhere. I know exactly what he would do. He would make his wife a new weapon for the next right hours and give her a heartfelt apology. He would be playing with his kids and telling them every day that he loves them. He would be proudly leading his people as his father and ancestry did before him. And best of all, he would be taking your current self and burning him at the stake. Don't deny it, because he would absolutely loathe what you have become. That's where you're right. Snotlout shook his head. So why don't you change? You know you hate it, you know how different things could be. Why do you insist on acting like this? Because it isn't acting. It's real. This is real, Snotlout. And Astrid. You give her so much sympathy, but you know what? Within 2 weeks of Brawn she was shoving me out the door and telling me to move on. Snotlout furrowed his brow, but Hiccup continued. I still can't get him out of my head, Snotlout. I have tried to move on, I have tried to let the past go. But I can't, and that isn't good enough for her. He paused to catch his breath, placing his fingers on his temple. I hate it. Everything. I hate that I feel this way, and I hate that I want out of my marriage. But I've changed. And that's not going to stop, and there's no point trying to relive the glory days because they are gone. Really? Gone. Then how come you still act like you around your daughter? Snotlout asked quietly, his eyes boring into Hiccup's. Because she's like me, he sighed. And so help me, someone needs to not hate me. So that's it. You're kind to your daughter only because of what she can do for you. No wonder she's always stressed out. I'm there for her when no one else is. Hiccup snarled. Yeah, because you need a little bit of hero worship from someone. Snotlout snapped. You would do the same for Inga. Not at the expense of my wife, my sons, and the village. Snotlout growled angrily when Hiccup's expression remained unchanged. And if you cared, truly cared, about her, you wouldn't burden her with all of your problems. You wouldn't stress her out and make her feel like she's the only one you trust. I hear her talking. We all hear her talking. Every decision she makes, she considers you first. And if it has even the littlest chance of hurting you in any way, she won't do it. The amount of times she's opted to stay home while all her friends went out to play. Did you ever notice that she only has one friend? And that she almost never goes to his house? Snotlout sighed, knowing that this angle wasn't going to get through to his former friend. But another popped into his mind. You know what I regret, Hiccup? I regret telling you and Astrid to your faces that I couldn't care less if Dager had your kids. I regret that every day. But you know what, after Brawn you both forgave me. I could wallow in self-pity until Ragnarok, but I don't, because what is done is done. It's over. I can't change the words I said then, but I can change how I act now. It's no different. It is different. Hiccup bellowed, his face reddening with rage. Dager can't forgive me for killing him. The berserkers who were loyal to him, his sister, they wouldn't forgive me for that. So yeah. I'm forgiven by the people who benefited from his murder. Big deal. Yeah, you regret killing him, so does this mean you wished for the other option to spare yourself a single kill? He would have your kids, Astrid, our village. How many of us loyal to you would have died? Hiccup smirked. You weren't loyal to me. We were. We were just afraid. But we planned to go down fighting if you died. I swear on my grandfather's grave. Then I guess you would have died. Hiccup said in monotone. Yeah, I guess we would have. Pity the one person who put a stop to it doesn't care. Snotlout sighed deeply and shook his head. We all imagine it every day. What could have happened because we were the ones to be left behind? I understand your view was different. So if only you could feel the fear we felt, what could have happened, maybe then you would understand. He paused, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. After a few seconds, he continued his thought in a voice scarcely above a whisper. I wish, gods, Hiccup, I wish you could see what would have happened. Then maybe you'd believe me. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Well, now we'll never know. He turned to walk away. Snotlout watched him before stepping away and shaking his head. I would have followed you to the end, Hiccup. And sadly, it doesn't look that far away. No. It doesn't. Hiccup marched away, his foot and metal leg crunching leaves and snapping twigs. Snotlout watched him go and he felt legitimately sorry for his friend. The hunched, stiff shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his teeth gritted together when he wasn't speaking. All he saw was a broken man that had no more optimism left to give the world and was drowning in his own sorrows. His world was crumbling around him and he was so broken by it all that he didn't even care. Snotlout was upset by many things given the current situation, but that right here had to be the worst. As she stomped through the woods, Astrid thought hard about the events that had led her to this moment. Not just Finn running off, not even the fight with Hiccup or Adriana, everything in her life that had led up to all of this. How Hiccup had caught her attention even before he managed to shoot down a Night Fury. How he had given her the privilege of being the second person to ever ride a dragon. How they had kept their relationship quiet for nearly a year before finally going public. How she had fallen completely in love with him and accepted his proposal. Their wedding day, their wedding night in which she had allowed him have complete control, the pregnancy that had resulted from their carelessness, everything in her life had been leading to this moment. And as she thought about every little detail that had brought her there, every single tiny event, something hit her. She had been right. She hadn't wanted to have a baby so soon after her wedding because she feared that children would mess up their marriage. And as much as she loved both her children and could never ever regret having them, her fears had all come true. They had, through no fault of their own, destroyed her marriage. If they had waited, perhaps Stoic would have told them about Trista in the anticipation of children. Perhaps they would have been more careful with keeping them safe, whether they were in the womb, in their playpen, or sleeping in their bedrooms. It was a miracle both of them were even alive with such incompetent parents. And now their family was going to be torn apart. This was exactly what she had feared. And it had all come to pass. But she couldn't blame them. They hadn't asked to be conceived. They hadn't asked to lose their innocence so early. They were merely pawns in the sick game the gods were playing with their lives. She knew, without knowing how she knew it, that they would watch one or both of their children die before they did. Their protections would inevitably crumble just like their marriage. And now there she was searching for her lost boy. The boy who had taught her how to love again, who sometimes made her so mad she wanted to strangle him, who was enthusiastic about almost everything, who made her laugh when she felt like crying. She and Hiccup had driven him away. That was the most painful reality of all. Astrid. A jarring voice snapped her out of her reverie. She turned around to find Fishlegs inspecting a thorny bush. She furrowed her brow as he reached in and tugged out a ripped, bloody vest. Her heart stopped and her hands flew to her mouth in horror. "It's his, isn't it?" Fishlegs asked gently. Astrid nodded. "This doesn't mean anything." He squinted at the sunlight pouring through the trees. "Let's keep going. I think there's a clearing coming up." They marched through, both terrified of what they might find. It wasn't a clearing at the edge of the woods. It was a cliff. Fishlegs and Astrid exchanged glances before stepping close to the edge. Something tiny and black was lodged in the rocks below. Astrid got out a spyglass from her satchel and peered into the water. There was no mistaking it. It was definitely her son's boot. She turned to Fishlegs, tears brimming in her eyes. He put a hand on her shoulder and she collapsed into his arms, hyperventilating loudly. "He's dead," she said in a trembling voice, clutching handfuls of the back of Fishlegs' shirt. He must have gotten attacked and staggered up here and. He could feel her heart racing, her entire body shaking. Fear had gripped her completely. Fishlegs had seen the haddocks frightened many times and had often been a source for comfort, but this time he could offer no consoling words. Instead he patted her back and hoped against hope that Finn was still alive. Unfortunately, hope was beginning to run out faster than water in cupped hands. Sun shone through the boards of the boat ship, making everything on its inside look striped. Finn thought it looked strange and spent a minute or so staring at the stripes, marveling at the effect. The boat rocked a bit more than it had at the docks, so Finn knew that they must be out at sea. He had finally escaped from Burke. He was on his own and he was free. He smiled triumphantly. This was the best day of his life. He looked around at the different pieces of merchandise with which he had spent the night. He had been correct that there was a wall of swords in front of him. There were jewels and dining sets and books of all kids, some in languages he had never seen, and funny-looking herbs. This was a treasure trove. Why, he could play with anything he wanted. The cool rock he had found was nothing compared to the hunk of gold on the floor of the shipboat. And the wooden dragon toys looked rather crude compared to some of the exquisitely carved dragons lining one shelf. There was even one of a dragon he had never seen before. As he stood up, expecting to have a day full of quiet playtime, he heard a horrible snoring sound come from above his head. Trader Johann was asleep. This meant that the boat ship wasn't in motion. This was probably for the best because he was going to have to move a bit, and if the trader was awake, he probably would notice a disturbance. But there really wasn't any other choice because Finn desperately needed an outhouse and he knew he was going to have to improvise. It took him a few minutes of searching before he found a small hole on the wall of the boat ship, high enough that it wasn't going to sink it but low enough that it was just going to have to do. When he was finished, he turned around to go back to where he had slept. He hadn't considered the fact that objects shifted when they were inside of a moving shipboat, and he had been too preoccupied with his previous mission to notice the noises. He took a few steps and tripped spectacularly on a small statue of Loki. He fell on his face, rocking the boat far more than he would have liked and making a lot of noise. Trader Johann would certainly be awakened. He only had a few seconds to curse the god of mischief for tripping him up. He could have sworn he saw the statue smirk, before the trader had descended into the ship's depths. Finn quickly hid behind a shelf of books, but he knew it was no use. Trader Johann would find him any second and his adventure would end. He bit his lip as he heard the man inspect the merchandise in search of the source of the commotion. If he was caught, he didn't know what was going to happen. But, he thought as his fist closed around the dagger on his belt, he was willing to do anything it took to avoid going back home. Chapter 6, Weak and Worthless. Chapter Text. Trader Johann had done many things on his travels. He had wrestled squids, witnessed executions, delivered a baby, that was something he wasn't eager to do again, run from a gigantic pack of wild terrible terrors, killed a timberjack with nothing but a 3-inch-long dagger, and escaped pirates on more than one occasion. He loved to tell stories of his adventures, some exaggerated a bit to add a dramatic flair and others told exactly as they happened because they were so exciting they didn't need padding. But one thing he hadn't done was invite anyone else to come along with him on the way to Rune. And he could definitely hear footsteps in the hull of his ship. As he descended to its depths, he thought of the time he had found a little orphan girl down there. He had traveled all over the archipelago to find her a family. He still heard from her on occasion. As he arrived in the cargo hold, he made a mental note to seek her out next time he was on Brawn. "Hello," he called cautiously. "It's all right, I'm not going to be upset. Come on out." There was no response. Sighing to himself, the trader began to wade through his merchandise. It was a few minutes of silent searching before he saw a glimmer of red in the far corner. He crept up to the source, which seemed to be someone's hair, and pushed a barrel of fine wine out of the way. A pair of bright blue eyes widened as they met his. "Fearless Finn Haddock," the trader asked incredulously. "What on the God's green earth are you doing here?" "I just wanted to go on an adventure," Finn said sheepishly. "Don't make me go home, please. That's up to your parents to decide." Trader Johann grasped the boy's upper arm and tugged him onto the deck of the ship. "And they are going to be mighty furious at me for kidnapping you." "But you didn't kidnap me." Finn struggled, but the older man was too strong. "Taking the heir of a tribe, that's a serious offense. I could be executed." Trader Johann muttered, more to himself than to the boy. When the trader finally let go of the hooligan heir's arm, the boy looked around at the vast expanse of ocean stretching out all around him. He was nowhere near home. This thought made his heart leap with excitement. He immediately did his best to commit every detail of this trip to memory. "Much too close to Rune to turn back now, they're already expecting me and they'll certainly chop my head off if I'm much later." Trader Johann continued, not noticing that Finn had completely tuned him out in favor of taking in his new surroundings. There was what looked like a shore far, far away in the horizon, Finn thought. It wasn't Burke, they had sailed far too long for that to be possible. It was a new place. A new territory. Somewhere Finn had never been. "Just going to have to get a message to your parents as soon as possible." Trader Johann finished. Finn looked at him, not having heard much, but the word parents got his attention. "Don't tell them where I am," he cried, crossing his arms defiantly. They don't want me at home. I want to go live there, he pointed to the distant land. On Rune. My dear boy, you would be thoroughly miserable there, I guarantee it. No finer place to live than Berk. And you're the heir after. Anna can be the heir. I don't want to go back. Let me stay here or go live on Rhone. Rune. Where I can take care of myself and do things my way. Finn continued as if he hadn't heard the correction. I am very sorry you feel that way, but I am contacting your parents the moment we set shore. I will not harbor a fugitive. Trader Johan said firmly. Finn huffed, but the man didn't seem likely to change his mind. Some adventure this was turning out to be. Still, at least he would be able to see Rune. No harm in that, was there? Of course not, he thought. How very wrong he was. Like most people would, Fishlegs felt a bit overwhelmed as he held Astrid, who was violently trembling and doing her best not to lose it. He couldn't find it in himself to believe that Finn had actually died. Something seemed off. Yes, the bloody vest, which was quite bloody, indicating multiple injuries, and the boot floating at the bottom of the cliff might as well have been the nails in Finn's coffin. In fact, if he wasn't ever found, they might be the only things in his coffin. But something held him back from the belief that fearless Finn Haddock had met his untimely death. Astrid. He said, awkwardly patting her on the back. Look, this is a lot of evidence, but we don't have a body. And until we do, I think we should keep searching. All right. Astrid took a deep, shaking breath and wiped her eyes. Where else can we go? Maybe we can retrieve the boot. There might be more evidence on the shore. Fishlegs suggested. Something clicked in Astrid's mind. Okay. Let's go. Without another word, she marched away, not bothering to check to see if Fishlegs had followed her. Within a few minutes, she had reached a small beach near the cliff. She didn't even look back to see if Fishlegs had caught up to her before hopping from rock to rock until she reached her son's boot. She plucked it from the water and turned around. Astrid, what are you? Fishlegs began, but Astrid held up a hand to get him to stop talking. Her mind raced. She wasn't sure what happened to her son, she didn't know where he was, didn't know if he was safe. But she knew that this was all Hiccup's fault, and now, she knew what she was going to do next. Her feet stomped on the twigs and leaves on the ground, her teeth gritting together and her muscles tense. There was a piercing coldness in her blue eyes that would freeze a flight mare. She had gotten lucky. She spotted Hiccup in the village square. He had come in the vain hope that Finn had snuck back while everyone was looking for him. Astrid came charging up, nearly bowling him over when she reached him. She waved the blood-covered vest and the boot in his face. You, she shrieked, causing everyone milling about to turn and watch the couple fight. This is your fault. What the hell are you? We found this snagged in a bush. Astrid threw the vest against his chest. And we found this at the bottom of a cliff. She pitched the boot at him. Hiccup's heart sank as both objects dropped to the ground. For a moment, he was silent, his eyes conveying the terror he felt as he stared at the bloodstains on his son's vest. He took a few shuddering breaths. Snotlout and Fishlegs watched the couple, both a bit too stunned to react right away. They didn't notice a crowd beginning to gather around the livid pair. You drove him away, and so help me, if he's dead, I will never speak to you again. Astrid shouted for everyone to hear, her face inches from his. Hiccup snapped out of his reverie, anger driving out his fear. Is that supposed to be your punishment? No lecture on what I did wrong. Sounds more like a reward for killing my son. And you call me sick? You are sick. Astrid slammed her fist into his chest, but he barely blinked. Sick and twisted, and if Finn is alive, I am taking him and Anna and leaving you. I'd like to see you try. Hiccup hissed through his teeth. Astrid leaned in, her eyes narrowed and her tone threatening. Go ahead. Call my bluff. See what happens. Hiccup laughed humorlessly and took a step back. I became a killer for them. Who knows? Maybe the next time will be easier. Astrid's heart stopped for a moment. She knew he wasn't serious, his tone was the same as it always was when he was bitingly sarcastic, but even for him, this was pretty dark. Not allowing herself to react negatively to a statement obviously meant to get a rise out of her, she laughed back. Sure, you'll be able to live with it. All that guilt doubled, festering in your soul. Think you'll be able to look your babies in the face and then tell them you killed another person? Well, it would be a terrible shame. With you gone, there would be no one to remind me of all the ways I've failed. His tone didn't change, but the bitterness was evident. Astrid rolled her eyes. If he was going to insult her in front of everyone, she wasn't going to take it lying down. As if you aren't cocky enough. And you're not. Always acting so superior. And even now you're playing the victim. Boo-hoo, my husband isn't fun anymore. Hiccup said the last statement in a high-pitched voice that made Astrid's muscles tense. If he noticed, he didn't let on. Pathetic. Oh no, you were always the pathetic one. Everyone knew it. It's a surprise Stoic dealt with it for so long. The words tumbled out of Astrid's mouth before she could stop them. There was a gasp from the crowd that had stopped to watch them, now containing Rough Nut, Tough Nut, Svala, and Heather. Most of their friends could hear this altercation, and both parents were internally glad they had instructed Eric to take Adriana as far away from the village as possible while they sorted this out. Hiccup choked for a second on his own words, his body trembling with rage. Finally he narrowed his eyes. Don't you dare bring my father into this, he growled dangerously. Why not? Afraid he'd be ashamed of you again? With a snarl, Hiccup raised a hand and made a fist. Astrid watched him as he took several deep, shuddering breaths and slowly lowered it. She smirked with pleasure. There it is. The festering can only grow so much before it's revealed. Hiccup's eyes flashed with rage, but once she had started, she was beginning to enjoy herself. Expanding your horizons, are we? Going to go home and hit our daughter? You might as well. Sooner or later she needs to see the person you've become. Her hero is nothing but a coward. It's no wonder she can't deal with her problems by herself. Hiccup was shaking, his face slowly reddening. I would never hurt her. Astrid unblinkingly met his gaze. You made the same promise to me once. I didn't touch you. Hiccup's fist trembled by his side, but he held it down. No, but you didn't need to. There's more than one way to hurt someone, and the gods know you broke that vow years ago. No fixing that. Astrid's smile widened as she saw her words painfully cut into him. Look who's talking. Hiccup snapped, gritting his teeth and begging the gods for self-control. I have done nothing but support you, and you spat in my face. Astrid said in one breath, jabbing him in the chest with her finger. Hiccup let out a derisive laugh. You call that support? I have let things slide. Astrid took a step forward so that she was uncomfortably close to him. He automatically moved back, but she didn't break her stride. I let your weakness permeate this marriage for long enough. Just admit it. That's all you are, have ever been, and ever will be. Weak and worthless. Astrid, stop. Svala pleaded. Astrid did nothing to indicate that she had heard. Hiccup blinked a few times, his heart pounding and his eyes burning. He begged his eyelids to contain the tears he felt forcing themselves out. His voice shook and he knew it was obvious what he was holding back. I sacrificed everything, I put my life on the line for you and the kids. I have done more than you ever could to protect them. Astrid burst out laughing, almost sounding like she was reacting to a joke rather than a heartfelt statement. Oh, that's a laugh. Have you forgotten about Trista? She put a hand on her chin, stroking it mockingly. Oh yeah, you always bring it up. You know what? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the broken promises I let slide. Come on, Astrid, that's enough. Fishlegs made a move to separate the two, but Astrid held up a hand and continued. You know who comforted me when our daughter was taken? Not you. You were too busy crying your eyes out and thinking only about yourself, not once remembering that she's my daughter too. Astrid's palm pressed onto her chest in a gesture to herself as she shouted her last statement, her eyes flashed with rage from depression and heartbreak that had been long repressed. Fishlegs took another step forward. Astrid. You don't think I would have loved a nice little breakdown? I held it together. And then, if that wasn't enough, you checked out on the whole family, the whole tribe, when your baby didn't come running into your arms the moment she was rescued. And I was silent. I had to tell Finn everything was going to be okay. I had to make excuses for you. Astrid took a few deep breaths, her body shaking with the anger she had held back for years. Hiccup stared at her, mouth slightly agape. Finally, she continued. And after all that, who does she run to? Who does she credit with saving her? Not me. You. And I put up with it. Because I thought she needed a hero. But I didn't know what you were. Hiccup's stunned silence finally ended. Why don't you get off your high horse, stop acting like I'm the only person who does anything wrong? He waved his arms to the crowd that had gathered. Ask them. I am a screw-up and I own up to it. They know it. I might not care deep down, but I still admit that I screw up and am not good enough. But you're no better. You rant and rave, you treat people like garbage when they don't meet your expectations, whether it is me, Addy, or a dragon you're training. He finally stopped waving his arms around, instead choosing to step forward and get uncomfortably close to her face. I said it once, I will say it again, you are obsessed with perfection. It's a real shame because you are so far from perfect. Astrid didn't break his gaze. Oh, I know. Wives are supposed to love their husbands. And all I can do is hate you. Hiccup leaned in closer. I hate you more. Astrid smirked. Impossible. They stood staring into each other's eyes, their faces so close their noses were nearly touching. Finally, Astrid shook her head and stepped back, her smirk spreading into a gleeful smile. You know what? Since we're breaking promises left, right, and center, I have an announcement to make. She turned to address the crowd. Hey everyone, you know what he did when he freed Toothless? He didn't just look his dragon in the eye like all of us did when we faced dragons. No, he tried to run away and then he passed out. Svala looked like she was on the verge of tears. Astrid, really, stop. Oh, and that's not the only time he's tried to run off. No, if I hadn't stopped him, he would have taken Toothless and flown off when we were 15. Astrid turned to face her husband again, a grin of triumph on her face. Hiccup gritted his teeth, his face reddening slightly. I could share some deep dark secrets of yours too, he threatened, fists balled at his sides. Astrid rolled her eyes. Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. Really? So it's okay if I just yell out for everyone to hear that you hated our kids before they were born? Hiccup turned to face the crowd, not bothering to keep his voice down. And let's not forget the time you killed your brother. Something inside of Astrid snapped. With a livid roar, she ran at full speed at her husband and tackled him to the ground. His head slammed against the dirt, momentarily causing him to see stars before he faced her. He let out a derisive laugh. You always did have to be on top. Astrid raised her fist and slammed it into Hiccup's jaw. He continued to laugh as blood dripped from his lip. That's enough. Snotlout bellowed, seizing Astrid's shoulders and lifting her off her husband. Rough Nut and Tough Nut bounded forward and helped their friend yank her off of Hiccup. She continued to struggle against them, kicking and punching everything she could reach, but their combined strength overpowered her. If my baby is dead, I will kill you with my bare hands, she shrieked as they dragged her away. Hiccup slowly stood up, his whole body trembling and his hand wiping blood off his chin. Oh, you won't have to, he muttered so quietly that only Fishlegs, who was standing rather close to him, was able to hear. It took Fishlegs a while before he could make his muscles move again. As he and Hiccup watched their friends drag a screaming Astrid away, he stepped forward and put a hand on the hooligan chief's shoulder. Hiccup, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was. You two need help, he said softly. No help can fix this. Hiccup said in a dead voice, his eyes never once leaving his wife. Suddenly, as if he had made a rather abrupt decision, he turned around and stepped out from under Fishleg's hand. Keep searching. I'll be back. Hiccup. Keep searching. Hiccup snapped, his voice becoming rather dangerous. I don't want to hear your voice or see your face again today unless you have my son. Fishlegs watched his friend stomp away, his heart rate accelerating and praying that Hiccup wasn't as broken as he was beginning to suspect. Though judging by the slumped shoulders, the tears brimming at the corners of his eyes, and the anger in his voice, the burly hooligan knew that his chief was probably worse off than anyone ever imagined possible. Hiccup didn't go into the records building very often. There was a copy of the law books in the Great Hall, which also contained the Dragon Book. Once in a while he would venture in to read a storybook, but that was long ago. With 2 children, he simply hadn't had the time. Why, the last time he was in there was to get his marriage forms. Paperwork wasn't very important to Vikings, but they did like to have things like marriages, births, and deaths recorded for future reference. However, the hooligan chief sought a different kind of form entirely. "Come on," he muttered to himself, opening drawers at random. "You've got to be around here somewhere." Curse the organizational skills of the old records keeper. No one had understood it when she was alive, and when she died, no one tried to correct it. In fact, they hadn't had a records keeper in 2 years. Hiccup thought vaguely that they should get someone else to at least go through everything and figure out a new system so that he could find something more easily. Then again, what he sought wasn't used very often. And then, in the 4th drawer he checked, he found them. The slips of parchment that would fix everything. He pulled them out, a small smile on his face. There were only 3 other copies of them left in the drawer, but then again, they were rarely used. He couldn't remember the last time someone had needed them. "Right, let's see," he said through his teeth as he rifled through them. They were pretty standard. He could have them filled out within a few minutes. The real challenge would be making Astrid fill them out. But he didn't think it would take much persuading. Not with the argument they'd just had. She'd probably be just as enthusiastic about signing them as he was. As he stashed them in a pocket in his flight suit, he paused for a moment. Was this really what he wanted? There was a reason these papers were rarely used. He bit his lip for a moment, his mind reeling. "I let your weakness permeate this marriage for long enough. Just admit it. That's all you are, have ever been, and ever will be. Weak and worthless." Yes. This was exactly what he wanted. He closed the pocket in his suit over the divorce papers. Though on the outside he surely looked purely angry, he knew by the tight constriction in his chest that words could oftentimes hurt more than the sharpest sword. And right now, he felt as if all his heart and soul had been torn to shreds. Nothing could compare to the pain he felt, the pain he hid. Horribly enough, there was only one thing he could do about it. But even worse was the all-too-real fact that, in his feeble attempt to squelch the pain he was suffering, the agony he so despised, he was ripping his family to shreds in the process, and he didn't care. He didn't care. Chapter 7, Deceiver. Chapter text. There was only one word that could describe Finn as Rune came into view: excited. The young haddock stood bouncing on his heels toward the prow of Johann's ship, watching with bated breath as the island grew larger and larger. Finn jumped a bit when a hand clapped his shoulder. He looked up at Johann with parted lips. "Stay close, lad. Can't have you getting lost on the island of Rune." Finn faced forward with an eye roll. Johann didn't notice this blatantly disrespectful action as he had already walked toward the stern. Grown-ups were so annoying, so frustrating. This was his first big adventure outside of Berk, with no parents breathing down his neck and no little sister whining about safety hazards and what daddy would say. Can't a kid live a little? He could handle himself. Sheesh. The closer the ship got to the docks, the more Finn began to see. The setting sun cast an orange hue across the skies as the earth began to darken, but he thankfully had very good eyesight. He began to see people milling through the streets beyond the docks, but no one seemed to flock to the ship like people did on Berk. This was very strange to Finn, but maybe there were less children here or something. Or maybe the adults here were even worse than back home. Oh, if that were the case, then he would beg for Johann to turn around before even docking. Johann finally docked the ship an agonizing 5 minutes later. Finn ran from one side of the ship to the other in order to catch all the sights and take in as much information as possible. Johann glanced at the boy now and then, surprised when he could see a small hiccup at first glance. He smiled at the thought, but it quickly faded upon reminder that the Haddock family wasn't currently doing well. Oh yes, Johann thought to himself presently. I need to get that message to Berk as soon as possible. Johann leaped onto the dock and tied his ship down, leaving a wary eye on the child, who began to climb over the edge of the ship to join him on the dock. Here, lad. Johann reached out a firm hand. Give me your hand. Finn scowled, unwilling to accept help from an adult. But the sight of the slapping waves 6 feet below and the churning water which was surely cold, he gripped Johann's hand and jumped to the dock. "There we are," Johann sighed, fixing Finn with a firm gaze. "Now, Master Finn, I need to send a message to your parents and I need to locate a terrible terror in order to do so. You will come with me and you will stay with me, and under no circumstances are you to wander off alone. Understood?" Finn glowered, crossed his arms and remained silent. Johann crossed his own, hardening his gaze in what he hoped was not a bargaining expression, as per usual. If he lost Finn, Hiccup would surely kill no